boarding passes, please." Diane Crawford's voice was crisp and professional as she greeted the elderly white couple ahead of Marcus Bennett. She smiled warmly, took their passes without even glancing at the screens, and welcomed them aboard with genuine warmth. Her auburn hair was perfectly styled, not a strand out of place. Her smile reached her eyes as she chatted pleasantly about their destination. Then Marcus stepped forward. The transformation was instant. Diane's smile evaporated completely. Her eyes traveled from Marcus's face down to his charcoal cashmere hoodie, paused at his dark tailored jeans, and landed on his clean sneakers. Her expression shifted from warm professionalism to cold assessment in the span of a heartbeat. "Sir, economy boarding is through the other gate. This is the priority lane for first class and our elite members." Her tone had dropped an octave, losing all the honey it had carried just seconds before. Marcus Bennett, 42 years old and CEO of Bennett Global Logistics and Aviation Holdings, had heard that tone 1,000 times in his life. He recognized it immediately. The assumption, the judgment, the certainty that he didn't belong. He kept his face neutral and held up his phone, the screen displaying his boarding pass clearly. "I am first class. Marcus Bennett, seat 1A. His voice was calm, measured, carrying the quiet confidence of a man who had learned long ago that anger only confirmed people's worst assumptions. Diane squinted at the phone screen as if it were showing her a forgery. She leaned in closer, her perfectly manicured fingers hovering near the device but not taking it. "This doesn't look right. Are you sure this is your ticket?" Around them, other passengers in the priority boarding lane began to notice the holdup. A businessman in a suit checked his watch impatiently. A mother with 2 children shifted her bags to her other shoulder. Marcus didn't move the phone. He held it steady, the blue light from the screen reflecting off Diane's skeptical face. "I'm certain. I booked this seat 3 weeks ago." Diane turned her head sharply to the left, where a younger male flight attendant stood near the galley entrance. "Brian, can you verify this passenger's reservation?" Brian Foster, 29, and eager to please his senior colleague, hurried over with a tablet. He was about to scan Marcus's phone when Diane put her hand up. "Actually, I'll handle this. Just stand by." But she didn't scan anything. She didn't check the manifest. She simply stood there, creating a wall of authority between Marcus and the aircraft. What Marcus didn't know in that moment, and what Diane Crawford was about to discover the hard way, was that in exactly 53 minutes, her 19-year career would be over. The man behind him would lose a $600 million deal, and this Boeing 777 would never leave the ground. Before we dive into what happened next, tell me something. Have you ever been judged before anyone even knew your name? Have you ever watched someone decide who you are based on how you look? Drop your story in the comments below, and if you want to see what happens when prejudice crashes headfirst into real power, hit that subscribe button right now. Because this story is about to take off, and you won't want to miss a single second of what happens when assumptions meet consequences. Now let's rewind to exactly how this moment started. Behind Marcus, passengers continued to board. Most walked past the confrontation quickly, eyes averted, unwilling to get involved. But not everyone. In the first-class cabin, an elderly woman with white hair and sharp blue eyes watched through the open aircraft door. Eleanor Davenport, 67. Traveling from New York to London to visit her grandchildren, had seen this pattern before. She'd lived through enough decades to recognize bias when it was happening right in front of her. She nudged her husband and whispered something, her eyes never leaving the scene at the door. 3 rows behind Eleanor, a younger man in his 30s settled into seat 1D. Ryan Mitchell was a freelance investigative journalist who contributed to major business publications, and he had a nose for stories. Something about the tension at the aircraft entrance made him pause in the middle of stowing his carry-on. He pulled his phone from his pocket, checked that the battery was full, and discreetly angled it toward the boarding door. Near the back galley, A young flight attendant with dark hair pulled into a tight bun watched the interaction with growing discomfort. Sofia Martinez, 26, had been flying with Velocity Airlines for only 8 months. She'd been assigned to this flight as junior crew, which meant she mostly took orders and stayed quiet. But something about the way Diane was treating the man in the hoodie made her stomach turn. She'd seen Diane do this before, always with passengers who didn't fit some invisible profile. Marcus remained calm at the door. He'd been in this position before, at 24, at 30, at 35, different airports, different airlines, same script. The assumption that he didn't belong. The scrutiny, the extra verification that white passengers never faced. He could feel the eyes on him. The other passengers wondering what the holdup was, some probably assuming he'd done something wrong. That was how it always worked. "I'd be happy to wait while you check," Marcus said quietly. "But I assure you, my ticket is valid." Diane's jaw tightened. She didn't like being told what to do by passengers, especially passengers she'd already decided were problems. The next shift happened fast. From the jet bridge came a booming voice, sharp and aggressive, cutting through the ambient noise of boarding. "I don't care what the investors say, Richard. We close this London acquisition by Friday, or I pull out entirely. Do you understand me? I will walk away and let them scramble." Victor Ashford strode onto the jet bridge like he owned it. 51 years old, wearing a bespoke navy pinstripe suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. He radiated the kind of entitlement that came from generations of wealth and zero accountability. A heavy gold Patek Philippe watch caught the light on his wrist. His steel gray hair was perfectly styled. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. He was still barking into his phone as he approached the aircraft door, completely oblivious to the standoff happening right in front of him. "Just handle it, Richard. That's what I pay you for." He ended the call with an aggressive tap and looked up. That's when he saw Marcus still standing at the door blocking the entrance. Diane's entire demeanor transformed the instant she saw Victor. The rigid judgment melted into fawning eagerness. Her smile returned wider and more performative than before. "Mr. Ashford, welcome back. It's so wonderful to see you again." She practically glowed with attention. Her voice lifted with that special kind of deference reserved for people she considered important. Victor barely glanced at her. Yes, Diane. Good to see you. Long day. I need a scotch immediately. Macallan 18 if you've got it." He handed her his trench coat without looking the way someone hands off trash to be disposed of. Diane took it eagerly, as if he'd given her a gift. "Of course, Mr. Ashford. Let me get you settled right away. Your usual seat is ready." She gestured toward the first-class cabin, specifically toward the front left of the aircraft. "Seat 1A." Victor nodded and started walking, completely expecting the path to be clear. He didn't check his boarding pass, didn't verify anything. He simply walked with the absolute confidence of a man who had never been told no in his entire life. Marcus watched this interaction with the kind of calm that comes from seeing a pattern repeat itself over and over. He noticed that Diane hadn't asked Victor for his boarding pass, hadn't checked his ticket, hadn't questioned whether he belonged. She'd simply welcomed him aboard and directed him to the seat he wanted. The contrast was so stark it was almost comical. Victor walked into the first-class cabin and stopped short. His face shifted from expectation to confusion to outrage in rapid succession. There, sitting in seat 1A with his small leather duffel bag stowed neatly in the overhead bin, was Marcus. His eyes were closed. His noise-canceling headphones were on. He looked peaceful, settled, already mentally checked out from the chaos of boarding. Victor stared at him for 3 full seconds. Then his face contorted with indignation. He turned sharply on his heel and snapped his fingers in Diane's direction, the gesture sharp and dismissive like calling a dog. "Diane, there seems to be a problem here." Diane hurried into the cabin, Brian trailing behind her uncertainly. What seems to be the issue? Mr. Ashford Victor gestured at Marcus as if he were a piece of luggage left in the wrong place. This someone is sitting in my seat. In 1A. His tone made it clear this wasn't a question or a polite inquiry. It was a demand for immediate correction. Diane looked at Marcus, then at Victor. She didn't pull out her tablet to check the manifest. She didn't ask to see Victor's boarding pass. She didn't verify anything. Her bias had already written the narrative for her. Victor belonged in first class. Marcus didn't. Therefore, there must be an error, and errors involving people who looked like Marcus were always resolved the same way. I apologize for the confusion, Mr. Ashford. She turned to Marcus, her voice dropping back to that cold, authoritative edge. Excuse me, sir. Marcus slowly opened his eyes. He pulled off his headphones with deliberate calm, letting them rest around his neck. He looked at Diane with an expression that gave away nothing. Yes, I need you to gather your things and vacate this seat. There's been a booking error. Marcus didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. He simply held her gaze. There is no booking error. I scanned my pass at the gate. I showed it to you when I boarded. I am in seat 1A. His voice was quiet but absolutely firm, the kind of voice that doesn't need volume to carry weight. Sir Diane said the word dripping with condescension. Mr. Ashford is a Platinum Elite member with Velocity Airlines. He has requested this seat. I'm going to have to ask you to move to the back of the aircraft. We can find you a comfortable spot in premium economy, and I will personally see to it that you are compensated with drink vouchers. Drink vouchers. The words hung in the air like an insult. For a man whose company controlled $4.7 billion in aircraft leasing contracts. For a man who literally owned the fuel supply contracts that kept Velocity's East Coast operations running. For a man who held the proprietary rights to 43 Boeing 777s in Velocity's fleet, including the one they were currently sitting in. Drink vouchers. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Then he spoke his words careful and measured. I am not moving to premium economy. I paid for first class. I selected this seat 3 weeks ago when I made my reservation. I suggest you check your tablet and verify the manifest. Victor scoffed loudly from where he stood in the aisle, arms crossed over his expensive suit. Oh, please. Look at him, Diane. It's obviously a glitch in your app. Probably some standby upgrade that didn't process correctly. Just move him so we can get this flight in the air. I have a massive merger to prepare for in London, and I cannot be dealing with this sort of nonsense. The words landed like stones. This sort of nonsense. Several other passengers in the first-class cabin had stopped settling in and were now watching the exchange with varying levels of discomfort. A wealthy older woman in seat 2B looked appalled. A young tech executive in seat 1D had his phone out, though he was pretending to scroll through emails. But everyone was listening. Marcus remained perfectly still in his seat. He didn't lean forward aggressively, didn't raise his voice, didn't make any sudden movements. He'd learned a long time ago that for a black man in situations like this, any show of emotion would be weaponized as aggression. So he stayed calm. Dangerously calm. There is no glitch, he said evenly. My boarding pass is valid, my seat assignment is correct, and I'm not moving. Diane's face flushed. She was not accustomed to being challenged, especially not by passengers she'd already mentally categorized as problems. Her hand tightened around the tablet she was carrying, knuckles going white. Sir Mr. Ashford is a valued Platinum Elite member. He always sits in 1A when he flies this route. Marcus looked directly at her. And I'm sure Mr. Ashford is very accustomed to getting what he wants. But wanting a seat and having a confirmed reservation for that seat are two different things. Did you check his boarding pass? The question landed like a slap. Diane's mouth opened slightly, then closed. She hadn't checked Victor's boarding pass. She hadn't asked to see it. She'd simply assumed he was entitled to the seat because he was Victor Ashford, Because he flew frequently, because he wore an expensive suit and carried himself with the kind of confidence that came from never being questioned. Marcus waited, letting the silence stretch. From the galley area, Sofia Martinez took a small step forward. She'd been watching this entire interaction, her stomach twisting into knots. She knew exactly what was happening because she'd seen Diane do this before. Not always this blatantly, but the pattern was there. Passengers who didn't look wealthy enough, who didn't fit the image Diane had in her mind of what first class should look like, always got extra scrutiny. And passengers of color got it worst of all. Sophia's voice came out quieter than she intended, but she forced herself to speak. "Diane, maybe we should just check the passenger manifest. It'll only take 2 seconds to verify both seats." Diane spun on, her eyes flashing. "Sophia, this doesn't concern you. Return to your station. But if his ticket is valid..." "Now, Sophia, or you'll be writing incident reports for the next month. Do you understand me?" Sophia's face went pale, but she held her ground for 1 more second. "I just think we should verify before we..." "That's enough." Diane's voice was sharp enough to cut. Sophia stepped back, her hands trembling slightly. But as she retreated toward the galley, she pulled out her personal phone and slipped it into her apron pocket camera lens facing out. If this was going to go where she thought it was going, someone needed to document it. Victor stepped closer to Marcus, attempting to use his physical presence as intimidation. He was a tall man, used to towering over people, used to his size adding weight to his demands. "Look, buddy," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing here with your screenshot or whatever you've got on that phone, but this is my seat. I've been flying this route for 15 years. Diane knows me. The captain knows me. So why don't you just take your little backpack and move along before this gets embarrassing for you?" Marcus looked up at him. His expression didn't change. His voice remained level. "I'm not playing a game, Mr. Ashford. I'm sitting in the seat I reserved and paid for. If you have a problem with that, I suggest you take it up with the gate agent or the airline. But I'm not moving." The cabin had gone quiet. Everyone was watching now. The pretense of minding their own business had evaporated. Eleanor Davenport in seat 2B leaned toward her husband and whispered loud enough to be heard by the people around her. "This isn't right. That young man showed his ticket. She didn't even look at it." Her husband put a hand on her arm. "Eleanor, don't get involved." But she shook her head, eyes fixed on the confrontation. "Someone should be involved. This is disgraceful." Ryan Mitchell in seat 1D had stopped pretending to look at his phone. His camera was now positioned carefully, capturing the interaction from an angle that showed Marcus's calm demeanor, Victor's aggressive posture, and Diane's rigid authority. He'd been a journalist long enough to recognize a story when it was unfolding right in front of him. And this was a story. Diane pulled herself up to her full height, trying to project an air of absolute control. "Sir, I am not going to ask you again. You are causing a disturbance. Federal Aviation Administration regulations require all passengers to follow the instructions of the flight crew. If you do not vacate this seat immediately, I will be forced to call Port Authority security and have you removed from the aircraft." Marcus didn't blink. "Then I suggest you call them." The words were quiet. Final. Diane's face went from flushed to pale to red again. She was trembling now, not with fear, but with fury. She was not used to being defied. Certainly not by someone she had already dismissed as beneath her notice. "Fine, you brought this on yourself." She spun on her heel and marched toward the galley, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. She reached for the wall-mounted phone that connected to the gate. Victor let out a triumphant bark of laughter. "You're making a huge mistake, buddy. You're about to get dragged off this plane in handcuffs. Hope your cheap upgrade was worth the arrest record." Marcus didn't respond. Instead, he calmly reached into the pocket of his hoodie and pulled out his smartphone. He scrolled through his contacts with the kind of practiced ease that suggested he'd made calls like this before. He ignored the murmurs rippling through the cabin. ignored the furious glare Victor was aiming at him, ignored Diane's voice from the galley as she spoke rapidly into the phone, her words clipped and urgent. Marcus scrolled past names that would have made Victor's jaw drop if he'd seen them. Industry titans, senators, billionaires, board members of Fortune 500 companies. He stopped on a specific name, Angela Reyes, executive assistant. He tapped it. The phone rang twice before a crisp, professional voice answered. Marcus. What's happening? Angela Reyes had worked with Marcus for 7 years. She knew his tone. She knew when something was routine and when something was serious. Right now his voice told her everything she needed to know. It's happening, he said quietly, his voice barely above a murmur. Just like we talked about. I'm ready. Do you want me to start documentation protocol? Yes. Log everything. Start the timeline. I'm on Velocity Flight 403 JFK to Heathrow. Gate 27. Logged. Timeline started. Do you want me to reach out to Thomas Kellerman now? Not yet. Give me 10 more minutes. They're calling Port Authority now. Understood. I'm on standby. Legal is ready if you need them. Thank you, Angela. Marcus ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. Victor, who had been watching with growing confusion, scoffed. Calling your lawyer won't help you, buddy. Airport police don't care about lawyers. They care about crew instructions, and you just refuse to follow them. Marcus finally looked at him. Really looked at him. And for the first time since this confrontation began, something flickered in his eyes. Not anger, not frustration. Something colder. Something that looked like patience. We'll see, he said quietly. Diane's voice carried from the galley sharp and urgent. This is Chief Flight Attendant Crawford on Velocity Flight 403. I need Port Authority security to Gate 27 immediately. We have an unruly passenger refusing crew instructions. Possible security threat. She paused, listening to whoever was on the other end. Yes. First class. Seat 1A. He's been aggressive and non-compliant. Both myself and our elite passenger feel unsafe. Please hurry. Marcus's eyebrow raised slightly at the words. Aggressive, non-compliant, unsafe. He'd been sitting calmly in his seat the entire time. He'd spoken in measured tones. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't made any threatening gestures, hadn't done anything that could remotely be classified as aggressive. But he knew how this worked. He'd seen it play out before in different contexts. The word of authority against the word of someone who didn't fit the expected profile. And authority usually won. At least it usually won for a while. Victor leaned against the partition between first class and the galley, arms crossed, looking smug. You hear that security's on the way. You could have just taken the drink vouchers and moved to coach like a reasonable person. Now you're going to end up in an interrogation room explaining why you tried to steal a first-class seat. Hope it was worth it. Marcus didn't respond. He simply pulled out his phone again and sent a quick text. To Angela, security called. False threat claim. Document everything. Her response came back in seconds. Already recording this conversation. Everything's logged with timestamps. The cabin had descended into tense silence. Other passengers who had been settling in were now frozen, watching, uncertain whether they should intervene or stay quiet. Eleanor Davenport could no longer contain herself. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up, her white hair catching the cabin light, her blue eyes fierce with indignation. "Excuse me," she said, her British accent cutting through the tension like a knife. "I've been sitting right here the entire time. That young man has done absolutely nothing wrong." Her husband grabbed her arm gently. "Eleanor, please sit down." She shook him off. "I will not sit down while this woman lies about what happened." He showed his ticket twice. She refused to look at it. She didn't even check. Diane turned from the galley, her face a mask of professional condescension. "Ma'am, I appreciate your concern, but this is a crew matter. Please return to your seat." It's not a crew matter when you're falsely accusing someone of being a threat, Eleanor shot back. I'm a witness, and I'm telling you right now he hasn't been aggressive. He's been nothing but polite. Victor rolled his eyes. Of course you're defending him. You probably feel sorry for him. But he's scamming the system, lady. People do it all the time. Flash a fake boarding pass, hope nobody checks, get a free upgrade. We're just making sure it doesn't work this time. Eleanor turned to Victor, her expression withering. I've been flying international routes for 40 years, young man. I know what a legitimate passenger looks like, and I know what prejudice looks like when it's standing right in front of me. The cabin went silent. Ryan Mitchell, still recording discreetly from 1D, adjusted his angle to make sure he was capturing all of this. Eleanor's intervention, Victor's dismissiveness, Diane's false claims to security, all of it. From the back of first class, another voice spoke up. A man in his late 30s, wearing a business casual outfit, stood up. He had the careful diction of someone who worked in law. I'm an attorney. If security removes this man based on false claims, I'll provide my contact information as a witness. He's been completely compliant. I've been watching the entire interaction. Brian Foster, the junior flight attendant, who had been hovering nervously near the galley, looked increasingly uncomfortable. He could feel the situation spiraling out of control. He approached Diane quietly. Maybe we should just check the manifest before security gets here. Just to be sure, Diane's glare could have melted steel. I know what I'm doing, Brian. This passenger is trying to take advantage of a system error. Mr. Ashford's status takes priority. But we haven't actually verified that's enough. Go check on the passengers in business class. Brian hesitated for one more second, then retreated, his face troubled. The heavy sound of boots on the jet bridge announced the arrival of Port Authority security. 2 officers appeared at the aircraft door. Officer Grant, mid-40s white with a stern expression, and the build of someone who'd seen every kind of airport incident, and Officer Lopez, late 30s, Hispanic younger, and more alert eyes already scanning the situation. Diane met them immediately, her demeanor shifting to one of professional distress. Officers, thank you for coming so quickly. I really appreciate your response time. She gestured toward Marcus. This passenger has been trespassing in first class. When I asked him to verify his ticket and move to his correct seat, he became belligerent and refused to comply. Mr. Ashford and I feel unsafe with him in the cabin. Officer Grant's hand moved instinctively to his utility belt, a reflexive gesture born from years of training. He approached Marcus with the kind of caution reserved for potentially dangerous situations. Sir, we need you to gather your items and step off the plane with us. Marcus kept his hands clearly visible on the armrests. He'd had this training too, though his came from a different source. From being a black man in America. From knowing that any sudden movement, any perceived threat could escalate a situation from uncomfortable to deadly. Officers, I'm sitting in the seat I paid for. I have my boarding pass right here. He slowly, deliberately pulled his phone from his pocket, keeping his movements visible and predictable. My boarding pass clearly shows seat 1A first class. The flight attendant has refused to verify my ticket on her system. Instead, she called you and falsely claimed I was belligerent. Officer Lopez stepped forward, his eyes moving between Marcus, Diane, and the other passengers who were watching with varying expressions of concern and interest. Sir, we can sort this out at the gate. Right now the captain has final authority on who flies on this aircraft, and the crew has requested your removal. We need you to comply. Marcus remained calm. I understand your position, officers, but before I comply, I want to make sure we're clear on the facts. I have not been belligerent. I have not threatened anyone. I have simply refused to give up a seat I legally reserved to accommodate another passenger who wants it. He looked at Diane. These passengers can confirm that. Eleanor immediately spoke up. That's absolutely correct. I've been sitting right here. He's been completely calm. She's the one who escalated this. The lawyer from the back cabin added his voice. Officers, I'm an attorney, and I've witnessed this entire interaction. This man has been compliant throughout. The flight attendant made no attempt to verify his boarding pass before calling you. If you remove him based on her false report, you're acting on fraudulent information." Officer Grant's expression tightened. This was not the straightforward removal he'd been called for. There were witnesses, there were cameras, and the passenger in question was being unnervingly calm and articulate. Officer Lopez pulled out his notepad. "Ma'am," he said to Diane, "did you check the passenger manifest to verify his seat assignment?" Diane's face flushed. "I didn't need to. Mr. Ashford always sits in 1A. He's a Platinum Elite member. This passenger is clearly—" "Did you check his boarding pass?" Lopez interrupted. Silence. Grant and Lopez exchanged a glance. They'd been doing this job long enough to recognize when something didn't add up. Before either officer could speak again, a sharp, authoritative voice cut through the tension. "Stand down, officers." Everyone turned. Emerging from the cockpit was Captain James Ridley, tall, imposing, silver-haired with 4 gold stripes on his epaulets. He was carrying an iPad, and his face was pale, his eyes wide with something that looked like shock, or possibly horror. Captain Diane said, relief flooding her voice. "Thank goodness. I was just having this unruly passenger removed. He's been quiet, Diane." The word cracked through the cabin like a whip. Diane's mouth snapped shut, her eyes widening in confusion. Captain Ridley walked past the officers, past Victor, past Diane, coming to a halt right in front of Marcus's seat. And to the absolute astonishment of everyone watching, Captain Ridley did not look angry. He looked terrified. Captain James Ridley stood in the aisle, his iPad clutched in one hand, his expression carefully controlled, but his eyes betraying something close to panic. He'd just received a message from ground operations, an urgent flag on the passenger manifest, a note that should have been visible from the moment Marcus Bennett checked in. But somehow it hadn't made it to the cabin crew. Mr. Bennett Ridley said, his voice carrying the professional calm of someone who'd spent 30 years flying commercial aircraft. "I need to apologize on behalf of Velocity Airlines for this situation." Diane's face went from relieved to confused in an instant. "Captain, not now. Diane." Ridley's tone left no room for argument. He turned his attention fully to Marcus. "Sir, there seems to have been a significant communication failure. Your VIP status should have been flagged to the crew. I'm very sorry for the inconvenience." Marcus looked at him steadily. "My VIP status is irrelevant, Captain. What's relevant is that your chief flight attendant refused to verify my valid boarding pass, accused me of fraud, and called security with false claims of aggression. None of that should happen to any passenger regardless of status." The words landed like stones in still water rippling outward through the cabin. Ridley's jaw tightened. He knew Marcus was right. But he also knew he had a plane to fly, a schedule to keep, and a situation spiraling rapidly out of control. "I understand your frustration, sir. I truly do. In the interest of getting this flight in the air on time, what can I do to resolve this situation?" Victor, who had been standing to the side looking increasingly confused, finally found his voice. "Captain Ridley, what's going on?" "This man is in my seat. Diane said she would handle it. Why are you apologizing to him?" Ridley turned to Victor, and there was something in his expression that made Victor take a small step backward. "Mr. Ashford, do you have your boarding pass?" Victor blinked. "What, I don't? Diane knows I always sit in 1A. I need to see your boarding pass. I fly this route all the time. I'm Platinum Elite. I don't need to your boarding pass now." The sharpness in Ridley's voice cut through Victor's bluster. He fumbled for his phone, pulling it up with hands that were no longer quite steady. Ridley glanced at the screen. His expression went even grimmer. "You're assigned to seat 2A, Mr. Ashford. Not 1A. Victor's face flushed red. That's a mistake. I specifically requested. You may have requested it, but you weren't assigned it. Mr. Bennett holds the confirmed reservation for 1A. Sophia Martinez, watching from the galley, felt a surge of vindication so strong it almost made her dizzy. She'd known. She'd known Diane hadn't checked. She'd known this was wrong from the beginning. But she'd been silenced. Ridley turned back to Marcus. Mr. Bennett, again, I apologize for this situation, for this. Is there anything we can do to make this right? Marcus's expression didn't change. Captain, I appreciate the apology, but the issue isn't just about the seat. Your chief flight attendant filed a false security report with Port Authority. She claimed I was aggressive and belligerent. That's on record now. Those officers were called here under false pretenses. He gestured to Grant and Lopez, who were still standing nearby, looking increasingly uncomfortable. That's a serious allegation that could have had serious consequences for me. And based on what I'm hearing from other passengers, this isn't the first time Miss Crawford has made assumptions about passengers based on their appearance. Eleanor spoke up again, her voice carrying clearly through the cabin. That's absolutely right. I heard her tell the officers he was a threat. He did nothing threatening. She lied. Ridley's face went from pale to ashen. He looked at Diane, who was standing frozen near the galley, her professional mask cracking. Diane, is this true? Did you tell Port Authority that Mr. Bennett was a security threat? Diane's mouth opened and closed. Her hands were shaking now. He was refusing to comply. I thought, did you verify his boarding pass before making that call? Mr. Ashford is a known passenger. I was trying to accommodate his preference. That's not what I asked you. The silence stretched. No, Diane finally whispered. I didn't check the manifest. Ridley closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, the fury behind his professional composure was visible to everyone. Officers, Ridley said, turning to Grant and Lopez. I need to apologize to you as well. You were called here under false pretenses. Mr. Bennett is a confirmed passenger with a valid ticket. There is no security threat. I'm very sorry for wasting your time. Grant nodded slowly, his eyes moving between Marcus and Diane. Lopez was already making notes. Sir Lopez said to Marcus, Do you want to file a formal complaint about the false report? Marcus considered this. Not at this moment, officer, but I will be speaking with Velocity's corporate office about this incident. Sophia, still watching from the galley, caught Marcus's eye for just a moment. He gave her the smallest nod, so slight that if she'd blinked, she would have missed it. He knew she'd tried to help. He'd heard her speak up and get shut down. That mattered. Ridley straightened his shoulders, trying to regain some semblance of control over the situation. Mr. Bennett, I'm going to personally ensure that your flight experience from this point forward is exemplary. Diane will be reassigned for the remainder of this flight. Sophia Martinez will serve as your primary flight attendant. Sophia's eyes widened. Diane's face went white. Captain, I'm the chief flight attendant on this route. You can't just, I can and I am. You will be working in the business class cabin for the duration of this flight. Sophia will take first class. But sir, this is not a discussion, Ms. Crawford. Be grateful I'm not removing you from the flight entirely. The cabin had gone absolutely silent. Every passenger was watching. Several had their phones out. Ryan Mitchell's camera was still rolling, capturing every word, every expression, every shift in power. Victor, standing awkwardly in the aisle, finally seemed to grasp that the situation had shifted entirely out of his favor. He looked at Marcus with an expression that was equal parts confusion and dawning realization. Look. He started, his voice losing some of its earlier confidence. I think there's been a misunderstanding here. I didn't mean to. Marcus held up a hand, cutting him off. Mr. Ashford, I suggest you take your assigned seat in 2A and enjoy your flight. We're done here. The dismissal was absolute. Victor's face flushed red again, but he had nothing left to say. He grabbed his carry-on and moved to seat 2A, sitting down heavily and staring straight ahead. Ridley looked at Marcus one more time. "Will you be filing a complaint with the airline, sir?" Marcus's expression was unreadable. "That depends on how the next few hours go, Captain." Ridley nodded slowly. "I understand. Thank you for your patience." He turned and walked back toward the cockpit, pulling out his phone as he went. He needed to call ground operations. He needed to call his supervisor. He needed to document everything that had just happened before it spiraled even further. But what he didn't know yet was that it was already too late. The situation had already spiraled, and it was about to get much, much worse. Captain Ridley disappeared into the cockpit, his mind already racing through the implications of what had just happened. He needed to file an incident report. He needed to notify his supervisor. He needed to figure out how to salvage this flight. But as his hand reached for the sat phone, another thought occurred to him. He needed to know who Marcus Bennett actually was. The VIP flag on the manifest had been vague, just a notification that special handling was required. But there had been no details, no explanation of why. Ridley pulled up the passenger information system on his tablet and typed in Marcus Bennett's name. The screen loaded, and Captain James Ridley felt the blood drain from his face. In the cabin, Marcus had settled back into his seat. His expression was calm, giving nothing away. But inside, he was running through calculations, timelines, decisions, consequences. He pulled out his phone and composed a quick message to Angela. "Status update." Captain intervened. Diane reassigned. "But damage is done. False security report is on record. Move to next phase." Angela's response came within seconds. "Understood. Kellerman's office has called twice in the last 5 minutes. They've seen the social media posts." Marcus's eyebrow raised slightly. Social media posts. That was faster than he'd expected. How widespread, going viral. Multiple platforms, videos from passengers. "You're being identified." Marcus allowed himself the smallest smile. Of course he was being identified. In the age of smartphones and instant sharing, nothing stayed private, especially not incidents involving discrimination on commercial aircraft. Eleanor Davenport, still seated in 2B, leaned forward slightly. "Excuse me, young man." Marcus turned to her. "I just want you to know that what happened to you was disgraceful. Absolutely disgraceful. I've flown for 40 years, and I've never seen anything quite so blatant." Her voice was kind but fierce, the voice of someone who had decided that silence was complicity. "Thank you for speaking up," Marcus said quietly. "It mattered." Eleanor nodded. "My granddaughter, she's in university now, studying civil rights law. She tells me that the bystander effect is real, that most people stay quiet because they think someone else will speak up. Well, I'm 73 years old, and I'm tired of staying quiet." Her husband patted her hand gently, but there was pride in his eyes. From seat 1D, Ryan Mitchell saved his video file and began uploading it to multiple platforms simultaneously. As a freelance journalist, he knew the value of breaking news. And this was breaking news. He tagged it carefully. Velocity Airlines Flight 403, Racial Profiling Discrimination, JFK Airport. He wrote a simple caption. Black passenger threatened with arrest for sitting in his paid seat. Flight attendant refused to check ticket. Watch what happened. Full thread below. The video was high quality, clear audio. Diane's refusal to check the manifest. Her call to security. The false claims of aggression. Victor's entitled demands. Eleanor's brave intervention. Captain Ridley's arrival. And through it all, Marcus Bennett's unshakable calm. Ryan hit post. Within 60 seconds, the first comments started rolling in. "This is insane. I fly Velocity all the time. This is horrifying. That flight attendant should be fired immediately. Anyone know who this guy is? He's way too calm." The view count began climbing. 100, 500, 1,000. Ryan posted a second video, this one showing the moment when Captain Ridley asked to see Victor's boarding pass and revealed he wasn't even assigned to seat 1A. The internet loves nothing more than instant karma. The view count accelerated. 5,000, 10,000, 20,000. Someone in the comments section posted, "Wait, I think I recognize him. Is that Marcus Bennett, CEO of Bennett Global?" Another reply, "Just Googled him." "Holy shit, that's definitely him." A third, "You mean the guy who owns like half the aircraft leasing contracts in the country?" Fourth, "Oh my God. She just tried to remove the guy who owns the plane." The thread exploded. Someone pulled up Marcus's Forbes profile and posted a screenshot. Net worth estimated at multiple billions. CEO and founder of Bennett Global Logistics and Aviation Holdings. Primary business aircraft leasing, fuel supply, contracts, logistics, infrastructure. Major client Velocity Airlines. The internet put the pieces together faster than Velocity's PR team could even begin to respond. Eleanor Davenport had also recorded portions of the incident on her phone. Her video came from a different angle, capturing Diane's facial expressions more clearly, the contempt that had been visible when she first saw Marcus, the fawning eagerness when Victor arrived. Eleanor posted it to her personal Facebook account with a simple message, "This is what racial profiling looks like in 2024. On a commercial aircraft, in first class. We need to do better." Her post was shared 40 times in the first 5 minutes, then 100, then 500. Her granddaughter, the civil rights law student, saw it and immediately cross-posted it to Twitter and Instagram with additional legal context about the dangers of false police reports and racial profiling. The story was spreading like wildfire across multiple platforms, being shared and reshared by thousands of people who saw in it a clear, undeniable example of bias in action. Business Insider picked it up first. Their aviation reporter saw Ryan's video and immediately recognized the potential scope of the story. Developing Velocity Airlines passenger removed from first class amid discrimination allegations. Passenger identified as billionaire CEO Marcus Bennett, major airline industry contractor. CNN's social media monitoring team flagged it next. Within 15 minutes, they had a producer reaching out to Ryan Mitchell for comment and licensing rights to his footage. The BBC's American correspondent saw it trending on Twitter and began making calls to Velocity's corporate communications office. Stock traders monitoring social media sentiment noticed Velocity Airlines trending for the wrong reasons. In after-hours trading, the stock began to dip. All of this happened in the space of 30 minutes. And none of it had reached Captain Ridley yet. He was still in the cockpit, staring at his tablet, reading Marcus Bennett's profile with growing horror. Bennett Global Logistics and Aviation Holdings. Primary business relationships, 43. Boeing 777s under lease to Velocity Airlines. Exclusive fuel supply contracts for Velocity's East Coast hub operations. Primary cargo logistics partner. Estimated annual contract value $847 million. Ridley's hands were shaking. He picked up the sat phone and dialed a number he'd only used twice before in his entire career. The direct line to Velocity Airlines Chief Operating Officer Thomas Kellerman. The phone rang once. "Ridley." "What's wrong?" Thomas Kellerman's voice was already tight with stress. He'd been getting calls for the last 20 minutes, from the PR department, from legal, from board members who'd seen the videos online. Sir Ridley said, his voice carefully controlled. "We have a situation on Flight 403. "I know. I've seen the videos. Tell me the passenger in question is not Marcus Bennett." Silence. "Jesus Christ, James. Tell me it's not him." "It's him, sir." Kellerman's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "And your chief flight attendant had him removed by Port Authority. She called them." "Yes. But I intervened before he was actually removed from the aircraft. He's still on board." What was she thinking? I don't believe she knew who he was, sir. That's not the point. Kellerman's voice rose sharply. The point is, she never should have called security in the first place. Did she verify his ticket? No, sir. She did not. Kellerman was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was tight with barely controlled panic. James, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Marcus Bennett's company owns the leasing contracts for 43 of our 777s. He owns our fuel supply. He owns our cargo logistics. If he terminates those contracts, we are looking at a financial catastrophe that could bankrupt this airline. I understand, sir. Do you? Because I'm looking at videos of your chief flight attendant refusing to check his boarding pass and calling him a security threat. I'm watching her lie to police officers, and I'm watching it spread across the internet in real time. Sir, what do you want me to do? I want you to keep that plane on the ground until I get there. Do not under any circumstances let it push back from the gate. We're scheduled for departure and I don't care about the schedule. Ground that plane. I'm leaving Manhattan now. I'll be there in 40 minutes. The line went dead. Ridley sat in the cockpit, his co-pilot looking at him with wide, concerned eyes. Captain, everything okay? No, Ridley said quietly. Nothing about this is okay. Marcus sat in seat 1. His expression calm, his posture relaxed. To any casual observer, he looked like a man settling in for a comfortable flight completely unbothered by the chaos that had just unfolded around him. But inside his mind was elsewhere. 18 years ago. A different airport. A different airline. But the same story. The memories came back in vivid detail, sharp-edged and crystal clear, the way trauma always does when something in the present pulls it back to the surface. Atlanta. Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. A humid evening in late summer 2006. Marcus had been 24 years old, fresh out of business school with an MBA from Wharton that he'd paid for with loans and scholarships and summer jobs that ran him ragged. He'd been wearing his best suit, the only expensive one he owned, a navy blue outfit he'd bought specifically for interviews and important meetings. And that day had been the most important meeting of his life. He'd just signed his first major contract, $3.2 million, a logistics deal with a Fortune 500 company that needed help streamlining their East Coast supply chain operations. It was the kind of contract that could launch a career that could turn a struggling startup into something real. Marcus had walked into that meeting as a hopeful entrepreneur with a good idea and had walked out with a signed agreement that validated everything he'd been working toward. He'd been celebrating the only way he knew how, by booking a first-class ticket home to New York. First class, because for once, just once, he wanted to feel like he'd made it. He wanted to sit in one of those big leather seats and have someone bring him a drink without him having to ask. He wanted to look out the window and think about how far he'd come. The ticket had cost him more than he should have spent, but it had felt important, symbolic. He'd boarded the Delta flight with his briefcase clutched in one hand, the signed contract inside it, his future secured in black ink on white paper. The flight attendant at the door had been an older white woman with steel gray hair and cold eyes. She'd looked at his ticket, then at him, then back at the ticket. Then she'd said loud enough for the passengers behind him to hear, "This can't be right. Someone like you couldn't afford first class." The words had hit Marcus like a physical blow. Someone like you. He'd tried to stay calm. He'd shown her his confirmation email on his phone. He'd explained that, yes, he'd purchased the ticket himself, yes, it was valid, yes, he was supposed to be there. She'd looked at him with an expression that said she didn't believe a word of it. "The system is showing an error," she'd said. "You'll need to wait while I verify this with the gate." She'd made him stand there, in the jet bridge, while other passengers boarded around him. White passengers in casual clothes in jeans and t-shirts with boarding passes that didn't get scrutinized with faces that didn't get questioned. They'd walked past him with expressions ranging from sympathy to suspicion to complete indifference. Marcus had stood there for 25 minutes while she called the gate, while she called her supervisor, while she made absolutely certain that this young black man in an expensive suit with a first-class ticket wasn't somehow trying to cheat the system. Finally, the gate agent had come down the jet bridge herself. "His ticket is valid," she'd told the flight attendant. "Let him board." But by then, his seat had been given away. "We're fully booked," the flight attendant had said, not a trace of apology in her voice. "I can accommodate you in economy." Marcus remembered the feeling of that moment. The briefcase in his hand containing proof of his success. The first-class ticket on his phone that should have been his validation. And the absolute crushing knowledge that none of it mattered, because someone had looked at his skin color and decided he didn't belong. "I paid for first class," he'd said quietly, "and we'll refund the difference. But right now, we need to close the door so we can depart on time." She'd said it like it was his fault, like he'd caused the delay by having the audacity to show up with a valid ticket. Marcus had taken the middle seat in row 37. Economy. Wedged between two strangers who'd both immediately put their headphones on and closed their eyes. He'd held his briefcase on his lap the entire flight because there was no room in the overhead bins. 6 hours from Atlanta to New York with a $3.2 million contract pressed against his chest and no space to even stretch his legs. He'd looked out the window at the darkness below and felt something fundamental shift inside him. Not anger exactly. Anger would have been too hot, too reactive. What he'd felt was colder, more permanent. He'd felt the absolute certainty that this would never happen again. Not to him, not to anyone he had the power to protect. The plane had landed at 2 a.m. Marcus had gone straight to an all-night diner in Brooklyn, ordered coffee he didn't drink, and pulled out a notebook. He hadn't written angry thoughts, hadn't written revenge fantasies, hadn't written anything about the injustice of what had just happened. He'd written a business plan, a plan to build a company so large, so essential, so deeply embedded in the infrastructure of American commerce that he would never ever be dismissed again. He would own the planes people flew on. He would control the fuel that powered them. He would manage the logistics that made the entire system work. And when someone like him, someone young, someone black, someone who didn't fit the narrow image of what power was supposed to look like when that person boarded a plane, they would be treated with the respect they deserved. Not because of kindness, not because of training, but because the alternative would be too expensive. That night, sitting in a diner booth with cold coffee and a used notebook, Bennett Global Logistics had been born. Not from anger, from something more powerful, from absolute unwavering determination. Marcus had spent the next 18 years building exactly what he'd envisioned. He'd started with small logistics contracts and worked his way up. He'd leveraged every success into the next opportunity. He'd made strategic partnerships, careful investments, calculated risks. By the time he was 30, he'd secured his first aircraft leasing contract. By 35, he'd expanded into fuel supply. By 40, he was managing logistics for some of the largest corporations in North America. And now, at 42, he controlled $8.7 billion in contracts across the aviation industry. He'd built an empire. But the memory of that flight of standing in the jet bridge while being questioned and doubted and dismissed that memory had never faded. It was why he still flew commercial sometimes, even though he owned a private jet. It was why he wore comfortable clothes instead of expensive suits when he traveled. It was a test of the system, of the people working in it, of whether anything had actually changed. And today on Velocity Flight 403, he'd gotten his answer. Nothing had changed. Different airport, different airline, different flight attendant, same assumptions, same bias, same script. Except this time, everything else was different. This time he owned the aircraft. This time he controlled the contracts. This time he had the power to make sure it never happened again. Marcus blinked, pulling himself back to the present. He was still sitting in seat 1A. The cabin around him had settled into an uneasy quiet. Diane had disappeared into the business class section. Sophia was carefully organizing the galley, her movements precise and professional, though he could see the tension in her shoulders. Victor Ashford sat in seat 2. Staring straight ahead, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. Eleanor was reading a book, though he noticed she kept glancing in his direction with concern. And Ryan Mitchell in 1D was still on his phone, still uploading, still documenting. Marcus pulled out his phone and typed a message to Angela. "How viral are we?" Her response came immediately. 1.2 million views across platforms. You've been identified. Velocity's stock is dropping in after-hours trading. Kellerman is en route to JFK. It's a full-scale crisis. Marcus read the message twice. Then he made a decision. He typed one more message. Time to ground the plane. While Marcus sat calmly in first class preparing for the next phase of what was about to unfold, a very different scene was playing out in the business class cabin. Diane Crawford stood near the galley, her hands shaking as she gripped a bottle of water. Brian Foster hovered nearby, uncertain whether to speak or stay silent. That could have gone worse. Diane said, her voice tight. The captain overreacted, but at least the passenger didn't make a scene. Brian looked at her incredulously. "Diane," he said quietly, "you called Port Authority on a confirmed passenger. You told them he was a security threat. That's not overreacting. That's a serious problem." Diane's eyes flashed. "He was refusing crew instructions, Brian. I don't care what his ticket said." "Mr. Ashford is a platinum member who's been flying this route for 15 years. We accommodate our elite passengers. That's how this works. By lying to security, I didn't lie. I felt unsafe. That's a legitimate crew concern." Brian opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. He'd only been flying for 3 years. Diane had nearly 20. Who was he to question her judgment? But something about this felt wrong. Very wrong. In first class, Victor Ashford had settled into seat 2A with all the grace of a man who'd just been publicly humiliated. He'd ordered a scotch from Sophia and was now sipping it while staring at nothing in particular. His phone buzzed. A message from his business partner in London. "Richard. Just saw some concerning social media posts about an incident on your flight. Everything okay?" Victor's stomach tightened. Social media posts. What social media posts? He opened Twitter, and immediately wished he hadn't. His face appeared in video after video, his voice loud and entitled, demanding that Marcus be removed, his dismissive gesture calling Marcus's concern nonsense, his assumption that the seat belonged to him simply because he wanted it. The comments were brutal. Who does this guy think he is? The entitlement is unreal. Just move him like he's furniture. Disgusting. Someone had already identified him. Victor Ashford, real estate developer, Ashford Development Group. And they'd started digging into his business dealings, his political donations, his country club memberships. Everything was being pulled into the light. Victor's hands began to shake. He put down the scotch before he spilled it. This was bad. This was very bad. He'd built his reputation on being a serious businessman, a major player in Manhattan real estate. His investors trusted him. His partners respected him. His competitors feared him. But respect and fear evaporated quickly when you became a viral symbol of entitled racism. He pulled up his company's social media accounts. The comments sections were already flooded. "This is who represents your company disgusting behavior. Will never work with Ashford Development. Just lost a major investor. Hope that first-class seat was worth it." Victor felt sick. In the business-class galley, Diane's phone buzzed. A message from a friend who worked for a different airline. "Just saw a video of you on Flight 403. Please tell me that's not really you calling security on a passenger for no reason?" Diane's blood ran cold. She opened her social media apps, something she rarely did while working. Her face was everywhere. Video after video showing her refusing to check Marcus's boarding pass, audio of her calling Port Authority and claiming he was a security threat. Her expression when she saw Victor, the shift from contempt to fawning eagerness so obvious it looked almost comical. The comments were merciless. She should be fired immediately. 19 years of this. How many other passengers did she do this to? This is exactly what racial profiling looks like. Someone had already created a hashtag VelocityFlight403. It was trending. Diane felt the walls closing in. Her carefully constructed professional image built over nearly 2 decades was crumbling in real time. Brian noticed her face go pale. Diane. What's wrong? She couldn't speak, just held out her phone. Brian looked at the screen. His eyes went wide. Oh no. In the cockpit, Captain Ridley was on the phone with Kellerman again. The videos are everywhere. Thomas. CNN has picked it up. BBC is calling. Our stock is dropping. Kellerman's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. How soon can you deplane everyone and get Bennett into a private meeting? I can't deplane 347 passengers without a legitimate safety reason. The FAA would want an explanation. Then find a reason, James. Equipment malfunction? Crew compliance issue? I don't care. But I need that plane on the ground, and I need Bennett in a room where we can contain this before it gets any worse. Ridley closed his eyes. Sir, I don't think it can get any worse. Oh, it can always get worse. And if we don't handle this correctly, it will. The line went dead. Ridley sat in the captain's chair, the weight of the situation pressing down on him like physical force. He'd been flying for 30 years. He'd handled mechanical failures, medical emergencies, severe weather, even a hijacking attempt once in the early 2000s. But he'd never handled anything like this. A billionaire CEO racially profiled by his own crew on an aircraft his company owned, with the entire incident documented and going viral in real time. This wasn't just a PR crisis. This was an existential threat to the airline, and Captain James Ridley was sitting right in the middle of it. Marcus sat in seat 1A, his phone in his hand, his expression giving nothing away. Around him, the cabin had settled into an uneasy quiet. Sophia moved through first class with professional efficiency, offering drinks and snacks, though most passengers seemed too distracted to accept. Eleanor caught his eye and gave him a small, encouraging nod. Ryan was still on his phone, monitoring the viral spread of his footage. Marcus opened his contacts and scrolled to a name he'd put off calling for the last 20 minutes. Thomas Kellerman, Chief Operating Officer, Velocity Airlines. He tapped the name. The phone rang once before being answered. Marcus Kellerman's voice was bright professional, but Marcus could hear the underlying tension, the forced cheerfulness of someone trying to control a situation that was rapidly spiraling out of their grasp. I thought you were wheels up to London by now. Everything going smoothly with Flight 403. Marcus let the silence stretch for just a moment. That's actually why I'm calling Thomas. The cheerfulness in Kellerman's voice dimmed slightly. Oh, is there something I can help you with? I'm currently sitting in Terminal 7, Gate 27. I've been removed from your aircraft. Complete silence on the other end of the line. Then carefully, I'm sorry what your chief flight attendant Diane Crawford refused to verify my boarding pass. She assumed my ticket was fraudulent based on my appearance. When I declined to voluntarily give up my seat to accommodate another passenger who wanted it, she called Port Authority police. Marcus kept his voice calm, factual, devoid of emotion. He was simply stating what had happened. She told the officers I was belligerent and posed a security threat. Both claims are false. Multiple passengers witnessed the interaction. Several are currently uploading video footage to social media. Kellerman's breathing had become audible. Marcus, this is... I'm not finished. Kellerman went silent. Miss Crawford refused to check my ticket because she was accommodating Mr. Victor Ashford, who claimed he always sits in 1A. She didn't verify his boarding pass either. She simply assumed he belonged there and I didn't. When I asked her to check the manifest, she threatened to have me arrested. Marcus paused, letting that sink in. The difference, Thomas, is that Mr. Ashford is white and arrived in an expensive suit. I'm black and was wearing comfortable clothes after 72 hours of negotiations. Oh, God, Kellerman breathed. Multiple passengers filmed the interaction. It's viral, Thomas. Over 1 million views across platforms as of 5 minutes ago, and people are identifying me. Which means they know I'm the CEO of Bennett Global. Which means they know my company owns the leasing contracts for 43 of your 777s. Which means they're putting together that your chief flight attendant just racially profiled and falsely accused the man who owns the aircraft she was working on. The sound that came from Kellerman's end of the line was somewhere between a groan and a whimper. Marcus, I am so incredibly sorry. This is inexcusable, completely inexcusable. What do you need? What can I do to make this right? Tell me about Diane Crawford's complaint history. What her passenger complaint record? How many complaints has she had filed against her in the last 5 years? Kellerman was typing frantically. Marcus could hear the keyboard clicks through the phone. I'm pulling it up now. Give me a second. Pause. Oh no. Marcus waited. She has 18 logged complaints in 5 years. How many involved passengers of color? More typing. Then silence. 15. And how many resulted in disciplinary action? Kellerman's voice was barely above a whisper. None. They were all closed as no fault found or passenger withdrew complaint. Who closed them? Her direct supervisor, Robert Brennan. And where is Mr. Brennan now? He retired last year. Early retirement package. Full pension. Was there a reason for the early retirement? Kellerman was scrolling through files, his stress audible in every breath. There were some HR concerns. Nothing specific in his file, but there's a notation about amicable departure and an NDA. Marcus let that information settle. So Diane Crawford has a documented pattern of complaints from passengers of color. None were investigated thoroughly, and her supervisor who protected her was quietly paid to leave with an NDA attached. Does that sound about right, Thomas? When Kellerman spoke again, his voice was defeated. Yes. Marcus leaned back in his seat. Thomas, I want you to understand something. I'm not calling you because I'm angry. I'm calling you because this pattern needs to end. Not just with Diane Crawford, not just with Velocity Airlines, but across the entire industry. I understand completely. What do you want me to do? First, I want you to pull the complaint files on every crew member who's had similar patterns. I want a full audit of how those complaints were handled and by whom. Done. What else? I want Crawford's employment file. I want Brennan's NDA voided so we can see what he was protecting. And I want to know how many other supervisors were quietly paid to leave. Marcus, that could implicate dozens of people. Good. If dozens of people were complicit, then dozens of people need to be held accountable. Kellerman was breathing hard now, the weight of what Marcus was demanding settling on him. You're asking me to potentially dismantle our entire senior crew management structure. I'm asking you to remove the people who enable discrimination. If that dismantles your management structure, then your structure was built on a foundation that needed to be destroyed anyway. Silence. Then, quietly, You're right. Marcus heard the defeat in Kellerman's voice and felt no satisfaction. This wasn't about winning. It was about making sure what happened to him didn't happen to the next person. Thomas, one more thing. Anything. Ground Flight 403. There was a pause. Then Marcus, "There are 347 passengers on that aircraft, I'm aware. The logistical implications alone, I don't care about the logistics, Thomas. I care about sending a message. Diane Crawford filed a false report with law enforcement. She weaponized police against me because of my skin color. If that aircraft takes off as scheduled, if she faces no immediate consequences, then you're telling every other crew member that this behavior is acceptable as long as you don't get caught on camera. But the other passengers will be rebooked, at my company's expense, every single one. First-class passengers get $5,000 vouchers. Everyone else gets $2,000. I'll cover all of it." Kellerman was silent for a long moment. "You're asking me to ground a 777 and rebook 347 passengers because of one crew member's actions?" "No," Marcus said quietly. "I'm asking you to ground a 777 because your entire crew management system failed, because complaints were ignored, because supervisors were paid to stay quiet, because a culture of bias was allowed to thrive unchecked. This one incident is just the visible symptom of a much deeper problem, and if you don't address it now publicly and immediately, then nothing will change." Kellerman's voice was strained. "If I ground that flight, the board will demand answers. The media will explode. The financial impact will be significant." "Yes, it will," Marcus agreed. "But if you don't ground that flight, I will terminate Bennett Global's contracts with Velocity Airlines, all of them, the aircraft leases, the fuel supply, the cargo logistics, everything." Marcus let that sink in. "And then your financial impact won't be significant. It will be catastrophic." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 10 seconds. When Kellerman finally spoke, his voice was hoarse. "I'll ground the flight. Thank you, Thomas. I'm en route to JFK now. ETA 40 minutes. Please don't make any decisions about the contracts until we can meet in person. I'll be waiting." Marcus ended the call. He sat quietly for a moment, phone still in his hand. Around him, the aircraft cabin was peaceful. Passengers settling in, the hum of the auxiliary power unit providing background noise. Everything normal, except nothing was normal anymore. In exactly 7 minutes, Captain Ridley would receive a call from ground operations. In exactly 9 minutes, he would make an announcement that would shock 347 passengers. And in exactly 43 minutes, Thomas Kellerman would walk into the VIP lounge at Gate 27, looking like a man who'd aged 10 years in one afternoon. But for now, Marcus just sat quietly, waiting, patient, knowing that the storm he'd set in motion was about to break over Velocity Airlines like a tsunami, and knowing that sometimes the only way to fix a broken system was to let the consequences of its failures become too expensive to ignore. While Marcus sat calmly waiting for the next domino to fall, the internet was moving at lightning speed. Ryan Mitchell's first video had crossed 1.5 million views. Eleanor's footage from a different angle had been shared over 50,000 times on Facebook. A passenger from business class had posted their own clip showing Diane's interaction with Brian, her dismissive attitude, her refusal to check the manifest. The hashtag Velocity Flight 403 was now trending #1 worldwide. And the internet had done what the internet does best. It had identified everyone involved. A LinkedIn post from an aviation industry analyst had confirmed Marcus Bennett's identity within 20 minutes of the first video going live. That's Marcus Bennett, CEO of Bennett Global Logistics and Aviation Holdings. Net worth estimated at multiple billions. His company owns the aircraft leasing contracts for half of Velocity's fleet. The post had been shared 100,000 times. Someone had pulled his Forbes profile and posted screenshots showing his business holdings, his industry partnerships, his role as one of the most powerful figures in commercial aviation logistics. Another person found and posted Velocity's SEC filings, highlighting the financial relationship between Bennett Global and the airline. Oh my God. She tried to remove the guy who owns the planes. This is about to get very expensive for Velocity. Their stock is already dropping, down 4% in after-hours trading. Someone call their PR department. Actually, don't. Let's watch this play out. The business press had picked it up. Bloomberg ran a breaking news alert: Velocity Airlines faces crisis after CEO of major contractor allegedly racially profiled on company flight. The Wall Street Journal's aviation reporter was already writing the story. CNN had reached out to Ryan Mitchell for an interview and licensing rights to his footage. The BBC's American Bureau was preparing a segment for their evening news. And on social media, the story was spreading far beyond just aviation circles. Civil rights organizations were sharing it as an example of how bias operates in spaces of privilege and access. Business school professors were using it as a case study in corporate crisis management. Legal analysts were discussing the implications of filing false police reports. Aviation industry insiders were speculating about the potential financial fallout. And through it all, one question kept appearing in comment sections, in think pieces, in social media threads. What's going to happen next? Because everyone could see that this wasn't over. A man with billions of dollars in leverage had been publicly humiliated, falsely accused, and removed from an aircraft his company owned. And he was Marcus Bennett, known in business circles as someone who didn't just react to problems. He restructured entire systems to prevent them from happening again. The internet waited collectively, holding its breath for the other shoe to drop. They didn't have to wait long. Captain James Ridley was in the cockpit running through pre-flight checks when his sat phone rang. The screen showed a number he recognized immediately: Velocity Airlines ground operations. He answered. "Ridley." The voice on the other end was tense, speaking quickly. "Captain, this is ground ops. We have an emergency directive from COO Kellerman. You are to abort pushback immediately and return all passengers to the gate." Ridley's hand froze on the checklist. Abort pushback. "We haven't even started pushback procedures yet. What's the nature of the emergency crew compliance failure?" "Kellerman is en route to JFK ETA 35 minutes. He wants all passengers deplaned before he arrives." Crew compliance failure. What does that mean? There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Captain, I'm just relaying the directive, but I think you should know. There's a passenger on your flight. Marcus Bennett." Ridley's stomach dropped. "I'm aware. I've already dealt with a situation involving Mr. Bennett." "Sir, do you know who Marcus Bennett is?" Ridley looked down at his tablet where Bennett's profile was still pulled up on the screen. "I do now." "Then you understand why Mr. Kellerman wants this flight grounded." Ridley closed his eyes briefly. "How bad is it?" "The viral videos have over 2 million views combined. Business press has picked it up. Stock dropped 6% in after-hours trading, and Mr. Bennett has apparently called Kellerman directly." Ridley's co-pilot, a younger man named Derek Chen, who'd been listening to one side of this conversation with growing alarm, leaned over. "Captain, what's going on?" Ridley held up a hand, still speaking into the phone. "What are my instructions?" "Make a PA announcement. Administrative issue. Deplane all passengers. Do not under any circumstances provide details about Mr. Bennett or the incident. Kellerman will handle all communication when he arrives. And my chief flight attendant." There was another pause. "Sir, I would suggest Ms. Crawford remain out of sight for the time being." "Understood." Ridley ended the call and sat in silence for a moment. His co-pilot was staring at him. "Captain Ridley, what's happening?" Ridley looked at him, and in that moment, Derek saw something he'd never seen before in the veteran pilot's eyes. Fear. "We're grounding the flight." "What, why?" "Because the passenger we challenged in first class owns this aircraft, and about 40 others in our fleet. And he just called our COO to demand we ground the plane." Derek's face went pale. "The guy in the hoodie? That's Marcus Bennett." Ridley nodded. "That's Marcus Bennett. And Diane called the police on him. Yes, she did. Oh my God. Ridley stood up, straightening his uniform jacket. I need to make an announcement. Then I need to go out there and try to salvage what's left of this situation before Kellerman arrives and fires everyone involved. Am I going to lose my job over this? Ridley looked at him. Did you do anything to contribute to the situation? No, sir. I've been in the cockpit since before boarding started. Then you're probably fine. But Diane Bryan? Possibly even me for not handling it better initially. We're in trouble. He picked up the PA handset. This is going to be ugly. In the cabin, passengers had finally settled into their seats. Luggage was stowed, seatbelts were fastened. The cabin crew was preparing for departure. Victor Ashford was on his third scotch trying to drown the anxiety caused by watching his reputation implode on social media. Diane Crawford was in the business class galley, her hands still shaking, scrolling through increasingly vicious comments about her. Sophia Martinez was in first class professionally offering warm towels and beverages, while internally processing the fact that she'd just witnessed her supervisor self-destruct. Marcus Bennett was reading something on his tablet, his expression calm and unreadable. And then Captain Ridley's voice came over the PA system. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. The cabin quieted. I need to inform you of a significant development regarding this flight. Due to a serious administrative and crew compliance failure, we are unable to depart at this time. Murmurs began immediately. All passengers will need to deplane immediately and return to the gate area. Ground operations will provide further instructions regarding rebooking and compensation. The murmurs turned into confused protests. We apologize for this significant inconvenience and disruption to your travel plans. Thank you for your patience and understanding. The PA clicked off. For a moment there was stunned silence. Then the cabin erupted. What does that even mean? Crew, compliance failure. What kind of reason is that? I have a meeting in London in 8 hours. This is unacceptable. A businessman in first class stood up, already pulling out his phone to call his office. Eleanor Davenport turned to her husband. This is about that young man, she said quietly. It has to be. Victor Ashford felt his blood pressure spike. Crew compliance failure. Administrative issue. He wasn't stupid. He knew exactly what this was about. And he knew that his presence in those viral videos, his entitled demands, his dismissal of Marcus, his use of the word riffraff, all of it was now attached to the story of why this flight was being grounded. His phone buzzed. Another message from his business partner in London. Richard. The logistics merger meeting is canceled. They saw the videos. They don't want to be associated with this. Call me immediately. Victor felt the blood drain from his face. No. That merger was worth $600 million. It was the linchpin of his company's entire quarterly strategy. Without it, his firm was over-leveraged, underwater, vulnerable. He stood up his scotch forgotten and looked toward the cockpit. He needed to talk to someone. He needed to explain. He needed to fix this. But as he looked around the cabin, he saw passengers staring at him with recognition, some with disgust, others with angry disbelief. They knew who he was. They'd seen the videos. And they knew he was part of the reason they were now being kicked off this flight. In the business class galley, Diane Crawford heard the announcement and felt her entire world collapse. Ground the flight. Deplane all passengers. This was catastrophic. This was career-ending. This was going to follow her for the rest of her life. She looked at Brian, who was staring at her with something between pity and judgment. This is because of the passenger, isn't it? Brian said quietly. The one you called security on. Diane couldn't speak. She just nodded. Did you know who he was? She shook her head. Brian closed his eyes. We're all going to lose our jobs because of this, aren't we? Diane started crying. Up in first class, Marcus Bennett calmly unbuckled his seatbelt, retrieved his small leather duffel from the overhead bin, and stood. Sophia approached him quietly. "Mr. Bennett, I'm so sorry about everything that happened." Marcus looked at her. Really looked at her. This young woman who had tried to speak up, who had been threatened into silence, who had documented the truth anyway. "You tried to do the right thing," he said quietly. "That matters more than you know." Sophia's eyes filled with tears. "I should have tried harder. You tried, and you documented it. That's what I needed. Thank you." He walked toward the aircraft door, where passengers were now clustering, confused and frustrated, demanding answers from crew members who had none to give. As Marcus stepped off the aircraft and back onto the jet bridge, his phone buzzed. A message from Angela. "Kellerman is 10 minutes out. Legal team is standing by. PR is in full crisis mode." "What's the next move?" Marcus typed back one word. "Tribunal." The jet bridge was chaos. 347 passengers streaming off the aircraft, most confused, many angry, all demanding explanations that the gate agents couldn't provide. Marcus walked through the crowd calmly, his duffel bag over his shoulder, heading toward the VIP lounge that Angela had already secured for the meeting to come. Behind him, still on the aircraft, Diane Crawford was experiencing the complete collapse of everything she'd built over 19 years. She stood in the forward galley, her hand gripping the counter so hard her knuckles had gone white. Her phone kept buzzing with messages, texts from friends who'd seen the videos, emails from family asking if that was really her, notifications from social media where her face was being shared millions of times. Each buzz felt like a physical blow. Brian had disappeared into the business class cabin trying to help with the deplaning process while staying as far away from her as possible. She didn't blame him. Association with her right now was toxic. Sophia passed by her expression carefully neutral, but Diane could see the judgment in her eyes. The younger flight attendant paused. "You should have listened when I told you to check the manifest." Her voice was quiet, not cruel, just stating a fact. Diane couldn't respond. What was there to say? Sophia had been right. Brian had been right. The passengers who'd spoken up had been right. And she had been catastrophically, career-endingly wrong. Captain Ridley emerged from the cockpit. His face was set in hard lines, his jaw tight. "Diane. My office. Now." The words weren't loud, but they carried absolute authority. Diane followed him into the small crew rest area behind the cockpit, her legs shaking so badly she could barely walk. Ridley closed the door behind them. For a moment he just looked at her. Not with anger, with something worse. Disappointment. "Diane. I've just gotten off the phone with Thomas Kellerman." His voice was controlled, but she could hear the strain underneath it. "Do you understand what you've done?" "I thought—" "No, you didn't think. You assumed. There's a difference." Ridley pulled out his tablet and turned it toward her. "This is Marcus Bennett's profile, CEO of Bennett Global Logistics and Aviation Holdings. Net worth multiple billions. Primary business aircraft leasing and fuel supply." He swiped to another screen. "This is Velocity Airlines' SEC filing showing our contractual relationship with Bennett Global. $847 million in annual contracts. 43 aircraft under lease. Exclusive fuel supply for our East Coast operations." He looked at her. "You called Port Authority Police on the man who owns this airplane." Diane felt like she couldn't breathe. "I didn't know." "You didn't need to know who he was, Diane. That's the point. You should never have called security on any passenger without verifying their ticket first. But the fact that it happened to be someone with this much leverage over our company, that's not what makes it wrong. That just makes the consequences more immediate." He pulled up another screen. Your employment file. 18 passenger complaints in 5 years. 15 against passengers of color. 0 disciplinary actions. Diane's vision was starting to blur. Your supervisor, Robert Brennan, closed every single one of those complaints as no fault found. He retired last year with an early pension package and an NDA. Ridley leaned closer. Did Brennan tell you to profile passengers, Diane? Did he encourage this behavior? She couldn't answer. Her throat had closed up completely. Because if he did, if there's a pattern of supervisory enabling, then this isn't just about you. This is about the entire management structure that protected you. Diane finally found her voice. I was doing what I thought was right. Mr. Ashford is a valued passenger. I was trying to provide excellent service. By refusing to check a boarding pass, by calling the police on a black man for the crime of sitting in his assigned seat. Ridley's voice rose slightly, the first crack in his professional composure. Diane, I've been flying for 30 years. I've seen crew members make mistakes. I've seen bad judgment calls. I've seen people have bad days. He paused. But what I watched you do today wasn't a mistake or a bad day. It was prejudice. Clear, documented, undeniable racial profiling. And you weaponized law enforcement to enforce it. The words hit her like punches. As of this moment, you are terminated from Velocity Airlines, with cause. Diane's knees buckled. She grabbed the wall to keep from falling. Captain, please, your badge and ID, now. She fumbled with the lanyard around her neck, her hands shaking so badly she could barely unclasp it. She handed it over. Ridley took it and put it in his pocket. Security will escort you off the aircraft and out of the terminal. You are permanently banned from all Velocity Airlines properties. Your pension eligibility will be reviewed by HR, but given termination with cause, you should not expect to receive it. 19 years, Diane whispered. I gave this airline 19 years. And in one interaction, you destroyed every bit of goodwill those 19 years might have earned you. Ridley opened the door. 2 Velocity security officers were waiting outside. Ms. Crawford needs to be escorted off the aircraft and out of the secure area. The officers stepped forward, their expressions professionally neutral. Diane looked at Ridley one more time, desperate for any sign of mercy, of reconsideration. She found none. Ma'am, one of the officers said gently, please come with us. Diane walked through the first-class cabin one last time. Every passenger still aboard stopped what they were doing to watch her. Some with satisfaction, others with pity, a few with the kind of righteous anger that comes from witnessing injustice. Eleanor Davenport caught her eye as she passed. You should be ashamed. The words were quiet but clear. Diane looked away and kept walking. As she stepped onto the jet bridge, the weight of what she'd lost crashed down on her completely. 19 years of seniority. Gone. Her pension, likely gone. Her reputation, destroyed. Her face, viral, forever attached to the worst moment of her life. She'd woken up that morning as a chief flight attendant with a secure career and a comfortable future. She was ending the day as unemployed, unemployable, and the global symbol of everything wrong with bias in commercial aviation. And the worst part, the part that made her want to disappear completely, was that somewhere deep down underneath all the justifications and excuses and defensive reactions, she knew they were right. She had profiled Marcus Bennett. She had looked at his skin color and his casual clothes and decided he didn't belong. She had refused to check facts that would have immediately disproved her assumptions. And she had called the police with a false report of aggression because a black man had had the audacity to challenge her authority. The security officers walked her through the terminal. Passengers stared. Some pulled out phones. She was being filmed again, this time in her final walk of shame. By the time she reached the terminal exit, her entire life had been uploaded to the internet, dissected and judged, and found wanting. The gate area at 27 looked like organized chaos. 347 passengers milled around, some at the counter demanding answers, others on their phones rebooking flights. Still others sitting in the uncomfortable airport chairs, looking exhausted and frustrated. Ground operations had brought in extra staff to handle the situation, but they were overwhelmed. One gate agent was dealing with a businessman who was shouting about a meeting in London he couldn't miss. Another was trying to calm a mother with 3 young children who'd been counting on this flight. A third was processing rebooking requests as fast as the system would allow, which wasn't fast enough. Through it all, the same questions kept coming. Why was the flight grounded? When will we know more? Who's going to compensate us for this? The official answer being given was vague and unsatisfying: administrative issue, crew compliance failure, further information to come. But in the age of smartphones and social media, passengers already knew more than the gate agents were saying. Someone held up their phone showing the viral video to a gate agent. Is this why we got kicked off? Because your flight attendant racially profiled someone? The gate agent, a young woman named Jennifer who'd worked for Velocity for only 2 years, had no answer to give. I don't have information about that, ma'am. I can only help you with rebooking. This is unacceptable. I understand your frustration. Let me see what flights we have available. Eleanor Davenport, sitting calmly with her husband in a corner away from the chaos, watched the scene with a mixture of sympathy and resolve. These people have a right to be angry, she said quietly. Their plans have been disrupted through no fault of their own. Her husband nodded. But that young man had a right not to be profiled and threatened with arrest. Eleanor's eyes were fierce. Exactly. And if grounding this flight is what it takes to send a message that such behavior won't be tolerated, then so be it. Across the gate area, Victor Ashford sat alone, his head in his hands, his phone face down on the seat beside him, because he couldn't bear to look at it anymore. The messages kept coming. From his business partner, from his investors, from colleagues who'd seen the videos and were now distancing themselves as fast as professionally possible. The London merger was dead. That much was clear. But the implications were spreading like cracks in glass. An investor had pulled out of a different deal, citing concerns about being associated with someone who'd demonstrated such poor judgment. His country club had called very politely to suggest he might want to take a temporary hiatus from membership while things calmed down. A charity organization had removed him from their board. Everything he'd built, every relationship he'd cultivated, every door his name and reputation had opened, all of it was slamming shut. And all because he'd assumed a man in a hoodie didn't deserve respect. Ryan Mitchell was doing something different from the other passengers. He was working. His laptop was open. His phone was recording voice notes, and he was already drafting the article that would accompany his video footage. The headline he was considering: When Assumptions Meet Consequences, How Racial Profiling on Flight 403 Exposed Deeper Issues in Aviation Industry. He'd already interviewed 3 other passengers, had gotten quotes from Eleanor about what she'd witnessed, had documented the timeline of events from multiple angles. This wasn't just a viral moment anymore. This was a legitimate news story with implications far beyond one flight attendant's bias, and Ryan was going to make sure it was told right. Sophia Martinez stood near the gate counter, still in her uniform, technically still on duty, even though the flight had been grounded. She'd helped with the deplaning process, had answered what questions she could, had tried to be helpful while her entire world was shifting underneath her. A passenger approached her, an older black woman with kind eyes. "Excuse me, honey. I was in business class. I saw you try to speak up when that flight attendant was harassing that young man." Sophia looked up, surprised. The woman continued, "I just wanted to say thank you. I know it couldn't have been easy with your supervisor right there. But you tried. That took courage." Sophia felt tears prickling at her eyes. "I should have tried harder." The woman shook her head. "You tried it all. That's more than most people do. Don't let anyone make you feel bad about that." She squeezed Sophia's hand and walked away. Sophia stood there, something shifting inside her. For the first time since this whole situation had started, she didn't feel powerless. She'd done what she could. She'd documented the truth. She'd tried to prevent it. And now, maybe just maybe, something would actually change because of it. Near the windows overlooking the tarmac, Marcus Bennett stood alone looking out at the Boeing 777 that was supposed to have taken off 30 minutes ago. The aircraft sat dark and empty now, a $70 million piece of equipment rendered useless by the actions of one prejudiced crew member. His phone buzzed. "Angela. Kellerman just arrived. He's heading to the VIP lounge. Legal team is in place. Union rep for Crawford has been notified and is en route." "Are you ready?" Marcus looked at his reflection in the window, at the man in the casual hoodie who'd been told he didn't belong, at the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company who'd been called a security threat, at the person who now held the power to reshape an entire airline's culture and policies. He typed back, "I'm ready. Let's finish this." The Velocity Airlines, 5. IP lounge at Gate 27 had been completely cleared of other guests. The heavy mahogany doors were closed, guarded outside by the 2 Port Authority officers who'd been called to remove Marcus less than 2 hours ago. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Inside, the atmosphere was that of a tribunal. A long, polished granite conference table dominated the space. Panoramic windows overlooked the tarmac where Flight 403 sat dark and grounded, a physical reminder of what this meeting was about. Marcus sat at the head of the table, still in his charcoal hoodie and jeans, still carrying himself with that same unshakable calm. The contrast between his casual appearance and the corporate executives scrambling around him couldn't have been more stark. Angela Reyes stood behind him, tablet in hand, ready to document everything. The door opened. Thomas Kellerman burst in, his suit-rumpled tie, loosened face flushed from stress and the rush from Manhattan. He was 53, but looked older today, the lines around his eyes deep with exhaustion. Marcus. He said the name like a prayer and a curse combined. "Thomas." Marcus's tone was perfectly neutral. Kellerman dropped into a chair across from Marcus, his briefcase hitting the table with a heavy thud. "I came as fast as I could. I've been on the phone with legal, with PR, with the board. Marcus, I cannot begin to express how sorry I am for what happened to you today." Marcus nodded once, acknowledging the apology but not accepting it yet. "Before we discuss apologies, let's discuss facts. Angela." Angela stepped forward, projecting data onto the screen at the end of the room. Diane Crawford, 19 years with Velocity Airlines. Chief flight attendant status achieved 7 years ago. Passenger complaint record over the last 5 years, 18 total complaints. She clicked to the next slide. Of those 18 complaints, 15 were filed by passengers of color. 3 were filed by passengers with disabilities. 0 were filed by white passengers without disabilities. The data was damning in its clarity. Kellerman's face went paler. Angela continued. All 18 complaints were reviewed by her direct supervisor, Robert Brennan. Outcome of review 3 marked as passenger withdrew complaint. 15 marked as no fault found. 0 resulted in disciplinary action of any kind. Marcus spoke. "Thomas explained to me how 15 complaints against passengers of color, all closed without investigation, doesn't constitute a pattern that should have been flagged." Kellerman opened his mouth closed. It opened it again. Marcus, I didn't know. This should have been escalated to HR. Regional management should have caught this. Should have. But didn't. Why not?" Angela clicked to another slide. Robert Brennan retired 8 months ago under amicable terms. Early retirement package, full pension, plus $180,000 severance. Required signing of non-disclosure agreement. She clicked again. 2 months prior to his retirement, HR received 3 separate complaints from junior crew members about Brennan's management style. Specific concerns raised encouraging crew to be selective about passenger accommodations, creating hostile environment for crew members who questioned his methods. Marcus leaned forward. So Brennan wasn't just protecting Crawford. He was actively encouraging the behavior. And when people started complaining about him, he was quietly paid to leave with an NDA to ensure he stayed silent. Kellerman had his head in his hands. I authorized that NDA. I thought we were avoiding a potential lawsuit. I didn't realize. You didn't realize you were covering up a pattern of discrimination. You didn't realize you were enabling prejudice. You didn't realize that by paying someone to stay quiet, you were telling everyone else in the organization that this behavior was acceptable as long as no one talked about it. Each sentence landed like a hammer blow. The door opened again. A man in his 50s entered, carrying a thick manila folder. Gerald Murphy, union representative for Diane Crawford. He looked around the room, took in the setup, and his shoulders sagged slightly. He'd been doing this job long enough to recognize when a case was unwinnable. Mr. Bennett, he said, offering his hand. Gerald Murphy. I represent Miss Crawford through the Flight Attendants Union. Marcus shook his hand. Mr. Murphy, have you reviewed the evidence? I've seen the videos. I've read the incident reports. I've spoken with Captain Ridley and 2 of the passengers who witnessed the interaction. He sat down heavily, and Murphy opened his folder, but his heart clearly wasn't in it. I'm here to ensure Ms. Crawford receives fair treatment under her labor agreement. However, I want to be clear that the union does not condone racial profiling, false reporting to law enforcement, or the weaponization of security protocols. Marcus nodded. I appreciate the clarity. Murphy continued. That said, Ms. Crawford maintains that she was following what she believed to be appropriate procedures based on guidance from her supervisor. Marcus's expression didn't change. Mr. Murphy, does the Flight Attendants Union condone refusing to verify passenger boarding passes before calling security? No, sir. Does the union condone filing false reports with law enforcement about passenger behavior? No, sir. Then Ms. Crawford's defense that she was following supervisor guidance doesn't actually defend her actions. It just expands the circle of culpability. Murphy closed his folder. I agree with you, Mr. Bennett, which is why I'm not going to waste anyone's time arguing otherwise. I'll ensure the termination follows proper procedure, but I won't fight the termination itself. He stood up. For what it's worth, I'm sorry this happened to you. He left. Kellerman watched him go, then turned back to Marcus. What do you want from us, Marcus? Tell me what it will take to make this right. Marcus stood and walked to the window. He looked out at the grounded aircraft for a long moment before speaking. I want a complete audit. Every passenger complaint filed against every crew member in the last 10 years. I want to know how many complaints were closed without proper investigation. I want to know which supervisors consistently protected problem employees, and I want to know who at the executive level authorized the ND that kept this quiet. Kellerman was typing furiously on his tablet. Done. What else? I want Brennan's NDA voided. I want to know exactly what he was protecting and who he was protecting. Marcus, that could expose us to legal liability. Good. If your legal liability comes from covering up discrimination, then you deserve to be liable. Kellerman stopped typing and looked up. You're right. I want mandatory anti-bias training for every single crew member, not a video they click through while checking their phones. Real training, with real accountability. Kellerman nodded. Already planning it. Marcus turned from the window. I want an independent passenger advocacy board. Rotating membership. Real authority to review complaints and recommend actions. No more internal reviews that mysteriously find no fault. Done. And I want you to personally call the families of every passenger who filed a complaint against Crawford that was dismissed. I want you to apologize to them directly and ask them to resubmit their complaints for proper review. Kellerman's face went pale. Marcus, some of those complaints are 5 years old. Some of those passengers may not even remember. They'll remember Thomas. Trust me. When you're profiled, when you're dismissed, when you're told your complaint doesn't matter, you remember. Every single detail. The room was silent. Kellerman finally nodded. I'll make the calls. Marcus sat back down. Now let's talk about the immediate situation. You grounded Flight 403. 347 passengers are sitting out there needing to be rebooked. I've already started the rebooking process. We're using competitor airlines where necessary. First-class passengers will be accommodated within 3 hours. Everyone else within 6. And compensation. Kellerman pulled up a document. We're offering first-class passengers $3,000 vouchers. Everyone else gets $1,500. Plus, we're refunding the full ticket price for this flight. No. Kellerman looked up. No. My company will cover the compensation. First class gets $5,000. Everyone else gets $2,000. And I want them to know it's coming from Bennett Global, not Velocity. Marcus, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Because those passengers didn't ask to be part of this. They didn't choose to have their travel disrupted. They're collateral damage from your airline's failure. And I want them to understand that there are people in this industry who believe that failure should have consequences. Kellerman was quiet for a moment. The estimated cost of that compensation is over $600,000. I'm aware. That's incredibly generous. It's not generosity, Thomas. It's accountability, something your airline should be more familiar with. The door opened once more. Victor Ashford was escorted in by one of the security officers. He looked nothing like the confident man who'd boarded Flight 403 hours ago. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his face was ashen, his hands were shaking. He saw Marcus at the head of the table and stopped cold. Mr. Ashford, Marcus said calmly, please sit. Victor sat mechanically in the chair the officer pulled out for him. I believe you have a meeting in London tomorrow morning. Victor's voice came out as a hoarse whisper. I had a meeting. With Gregory Pierce, Vice President of European Acquisitions for Bennett Global. Victor's eyes widened. You know Greg. He works for me, Mr. Ashford. Victor looked like he might be sick. The waterfront logistics development, the $600 million project you were pitching. Victor could only nod. You were pitching to my company to acquire property that you planned to lease to logistics operators, including, presumably, to Bennett Global itself. Victor's face had lost all color. Marcus pulled out his phone, dialed a number, and put it on speaker. It rang twice before a crisp British accent answered. Marcus, I was hoping you'd call. Greg, I'm in a meeting with Victor Ashford. Are you still planning to meet with him tomorrow? There was a pause. After seeing the videos, after what he said to you? Absolutely not. I canceled the meeting 2 hours ago and sent formal notice that we're withdrawing from negotiations entirely. Victor made a sound like he'd been punched. Thank you, Greg. That's all I needed to confirm. Marcus ended the call and looked at Victor. Mr. Ashford, I'm not going to destroy you because you called me riffraff. I'm not going to bankrupt your company because you assumed I didn't belong in first class. Victor looked up, a flicker of desperate hope in his eyes. But I am going to let you experience the natural consequences of your own actions. You made assumptions based on prejudice. You treated me like I was beneath you. You demanded my arrest for the crime of existing in your preferred seat. Marcus leaned forward. Your investors pulled out because they saw who you really are when you think no one important is watching. Your partners distanced themselves because they don't want to be associated with that kind of judgment. Your business is failing because you built it on arrogance and entitlement rather than actual competence and integrity. I didn't cause that, Mr. Ashford. You did. I'm just not going to save you from yourself. Victor's voice cracked. I have 200 employees. If my company fails, they lose their jobs. Then I suggest you sell what's left to someone with better character who can actually run it properly. Your employees deserve better leadership than someone who thinks respect is something you only give to people you perceive as powerful. Victor slumped in his chair, broken. Marcus stood. Thomas, I trust you'll handle the remaining logistics of passenger rebooking and crew reassignments. Kellerman nodded. What about our contracts? The aircraft leases? The fuel supply? Marcus looked at him for a long moment. I'm not going to terminate the contracts, Thomas, because that would hurt the 50,000 people who work for Velocity Airlines, most of whom had nothing to do with what happened today. Kellerman's relief was visible. But I am adding performance clauses related to passenger treatment and complaint resolution. Any future incidents of discrimination will trigger immediate contract review, and if I see patterns like Crawford's being protected again, I will walk away and take every aircraft, every fuel contract, and every logistics partnership with me. Kellerman stood up and offered his hand. You have my word that this will never happen again. Marcus shook it. See that it doesn't. The VIP lounge had cleared out. Kellerman had left to handle the logistics of rebooking 347 passengers. Victor had been escorted out, his empire crumbling around him. The security officers had returned to their regular duties. It was just Marcus and Angela now, along with the data she'd compiled. There's more, Angela said quietly. Marcus looked at her. Show me. She pulled up a new set of documents on the screen. While you were meeting with Kellerman, our research team finished digging into Velocity's complaint resolution system. It's worse than we thought. She clicked through several screens. Robert Brennan wasn't the only supervisor closing complaints without investigation. We found 6 other regional supervisors with similar patterns over the last decade. The data spread across the screen. Names, complaint numbers, closure patterns. Combined, these 7 supervisors handled 847 passenger complaints over 10 years. 312 of those complaints specifically mentioned potential discrimination or profiling. Of those 312, only 18 resulted in any disciplinary action. The rest were closed as no fault found or passenger withdrew complaint. Marcus studied the numbers and the demographic breakdown of complainants. Angela clicked again. Of the 312 discrimination-related complaints, 94% were filed by passengers of color. 6% were filed by passengers with disabilities or non-native English speakers. She paused. 0 complaints filed by white passengers without disabilities were closed as no fault found. Every single one resulted in either investigation or crew discipline. The pattern was undeniable. What happened to these supervisors? Angela pulled up another document. 5 retired with early pension packages and NDAs. 1 was promoted to a corporate training position. 1 is still active as a regional supervisor in Chicago. Marcus sat back. So the airline didn't just fail to address the problem. They rewarded people who covered it up. Angela nodded. There's more. The NDA language is consistent across all 5 retirement packages. Same law firm drafted them. Same approval chain at the executive level. Who approved them? She highlighted a name. Richard Chen, former VP of Human Resources. He retired 3 years ago. Also with an NDA, also with an NDA. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. It's not just individual prejudice. It's a pattern of institutional enabling that goes back at least a decade. Angela was quiet for a moment. Marcus, if we expose all of this publicly, Velocity could face class action lawsuits from every passenger who filed a complaint that was improperly closed. We're talking potentially hundreds of millions in legal liability. I know. The airline could actually fold. 50,000 jobs could be lost. Marcus opened his eyes and looked at the data again. Or, he said slowly, they could implement real reform. Create actual accountability structures. Make it financially impossible to repeat these patterns. Angela nodded. That's what I thought you'd say. Marcus stood and walked to the window. The grounded 777 was still sitting on the tarmac, cargo doors open, maintenance crew swarming around it now that the passenger crisis had been handed off to ground operations. Get me the names and contact information for every passenger who filed a discrimination complaint that was closed without proper investigation. All 294 of them. All 294. I want them contacted personally. I want them told that their complaints are being reopened. I want them offered the opportunity to have their cases reviewed by an independent board. And if they want compensation, then we compensate them. Whatever's fair. That could cost millions. Good. Let it cost millions. Let it be so expensive that no airline ever thinks it's cheaper to hide the problem than fix it. Angela was already typing notes. I'll set up the outreach program. We'll need a law firm to handle the individual case reviews. Use Thompson and Associates. They specialize in civil rights cases. They'll be fair. What about Kellerman? Does he know you're planning this? Not yet. But he will. Marcus turned from the window. Schedule a follow-up meeting with him for next week. I want Velocity's CEO there too, and their board chairman. This conversation needs to happen at the highest level. Consider it done. And Angela, one more thing. Yes, I want you to reach out to Sophia Martinez, the junior flight attendant who tried to speak up. Offer her a position with Bennett Global if she's interested. Passenger experience consulting. Someone with her courage and integrity should be leading reform, not serving drinks. Angela smiled. I'll contact her tonight. Marcus gathered his things. I'm taking the private jet to London. I still have that meeting with the supply chain consortium tomorrow morning. Of course, I'll have the car meet you at Teterboro in 30 minutes. Thank you, Angela. He started toward the door, then paused. You know what the sad part is? What's that? This shouldn't have required me being a billionaire. CEO. Crawford should have been held accountable the first time she profiled someone. The second time, the 15th time. The system only responded because the person she targeted this time had the power to force accountability. What about all the people who came before me who didn't have that power, who filed complaints that went nowhere, who were told their concerns didn't matter? He shook his head. That's what we're really fixing here. Not just what happened to me, what happened to everyone who couldn't fight back. Angela looked at him with deep respect. That's why you're doing this the right way, Marcus. Not for revenge, for reform. Marcus walked out of the VIP lounge and into the terminal. Around him, the rebooking process was still underway. Some passengers had already been accommodated on other flights. Others were still waiting, frustrated but calmer now that they had answers. Eleanor Davenport caught his eye from across the gate area. She walked over. Mr. Bennett, I wanted to say goodbye before our flight. We've been rebooked on a British Airways departure in 2 hours. Mrs. Davenport, I hope the disruption wasn't too significant. My dear boy, Eleanor said firmly. Some disruptions are absolutely necessary. What you did today, standing your ground and demanding accountability, that needed to happen. She squeezed his hand. My granddaughter studies civil rights law. I'm going to tell her this story. About the day I saw one man refuse to accept prejudice and changed an entire airline's policies because of it. Marcus smiled. Tell her that change doesn't happen because of one person. It happens because of everyone who speaks up, including a brave woman in seat 2B who could have stayed quiet but chose to witness instead. Eleanor's eyes glistened. You take care, young man, and keep fighting the good fight. She walked back to her husband. Ryan Mitchell approached Next laptop bag over his shoulder. Mr. Bennett, I'm about to publish the full story. I wanted to give you one last chance to comment on the record. Marcus considered this. What's your headline when the system protects bias? How one airline's culture of discrimination was exposed by a passenger who refused to stay silent. That's good. It's true. What do you want me to say, Ryan? Tell me what you want people to understand about today. Marcus thought for a moment. I want people to understand that what happened to me today happens to people who look like me every day. In airports, in hotels, in banks, in stores. We're questioned. We're doubted. We're treated like we're suspicious until we prove otherwise. The only difference today is that I had the resources and the leverage to demand accountability. But accountability shouldn't require power. It should be built into the system. Ryan was typing rapidly. And what's your message to other airlines? Fix your culture before someone with leverage forces you to. Because the next person who gets profiled might not be as patient as I was. They might not give you the chance to reform. They might just walk away and take their business elsewhere. And in an industry with thin margins and intense competition, can you really afford that? Ryan looked up from his laptop. That's perfect. Thank you. He extended his hand. For what it's worth, watching you handle this with such control and strategic thinking while everyone else was panicking, that was impressive. Marcus shook his hand. Document it honestly. That's all I ask. Always. Marcus left the terminal and headed for the exit where his car was waiting to take him to Teterboro and his private jet. Behind him, the consequences of Flight 403 continued to ripple outward. But ahead of him was London and a supply chain meeting and the next chapter of building an empire that would make it impossible for anyone to dismiss him again. Victor Ashford sat in his office 3 days later, surrounded by the physical evidence of his imploding empire. The corner office on the 42nd floor of a Manhattan high-rise had once felt like a throne room. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Modern furniture that cost more than most people's cars. Awards and photographs documenting 2 decades of deals and developments. Now it felt like a mausoleum. His desk was covered with documents, termination notices, loan default warnings, investor withdrawal letters, legal correspondence. The $600 million London deal was dead. That had been confirmed within 24 hours of the Flight 403 incident. But the cascade had continued. Wellington Capital. His primary investment partner had pulled out of 3 other active developments, citing contractual clauses about reputational damage. 2 of his board members had resigned. His largest commercial tenant had invoked an early termination clause on their lease, willing to pay the penalty to distance themselves from association with him. And this morning his bank had called a meeting to discuss his over-leveraged position. The waterfront property he'd mortgaged everything to acquire was now worthless to him. Without Bennett Global's commitment, no other logistics company would touch it. The property sat empty, generating no revenue while accruing massive debt service costs. Victor's business partner, Richard, sat across from him looking haggard. The bank wants everything, Victor. The waterfront property, the Midtown development, even the office building we're sitting in right now. Victor stared at the Central Park view. How much time do we have? 30 days to restructure or they force a sale. And Richard paused. Victor, they're not going to accept any restructuring plan that keeps you in leadership. Victor's voice was hollow. So I'm out. Of the company my grandfather founded. The company I've run for 23 years. Unless we file for bankruptcy protection. But even then, the trustees would likely require new management as a condition of reorganization. Victor put his head in his hands. 200 employees, Richard. What happens to them? If we're lucky, whoever acquires the assets will keep most of the staff. They're good people. They deserve better than what we gave them. The "we" hit Victor hard. Richard had been his partner for 15 years. And now even Richard was using past tense. I've had 3 job offers, Richard said quietly. All contingent on me publicly distancing myself from you. Victor looked up. "You should take one." Richard met his eyes. "I'm sorry, Victor. I am. But I have a family. I have a mortgage. I can't go down with this ship." "I understand." Richard stood up, hesitated, then extended his hand. "For what it's worth, I don't think you're a bad person. I think you made a terrible decision in a moment of entitlement. And I think the punishment is disproportionate to the crime. But the world doesn't care about proportionality. It cares about optics, and the optics of what you did on camera going viral, they're not survivable." Richard left. Victor sat alone in his office as the afternoon sun slanted through the windows. His phone buzzed. Another news alert. Bennett Global announces acquisition of Portland waterfront property. Victor opened the article with shaking hands. Marcus Bennett's company had purchased the waterfront development at auction for $280 million. The article quoted a Bennett Global spokesperson saying the property would be developed as a multimodal logistics hub serving the Northeast Corridor. The same project Victor had envisioned. The same development he'd bankrupted himself trying to create. Now in Marcus Bennett's hands. The irony was almost poetic. Victor's personal assistant knocked quietly on the door. "Mr. Ashford's security is here. They need to start the process of removing personal items. The building is going into receivership tomorrow morning." "Already, I'm sorry, sir." Victor stood up slowly. He walked to the credenza where photos of his achievements were displayed. Groundbreakings, ribbon cuttings, award ceremonies. He'd thought these moments defined him, proof of his success, his importance, his place in the Manhattan real estate hierarchy. But none of it had been built on actual substance. It had been built on perception, on relationships with people who valued him only as long as he was useful, on deals that worked only as long as everyone believed in his infallibility. One viral video had shattered that perception, and everything built on it had crumbled. He packed the photos into a box, his hands moving mechanically. His assistant watched from the doorway. "Sir, if I may," Victor looked up. "I've worked for you for 8 years, and I want you to know that watching how you treated that man on the plane, hearing what you said to him, it changed how I see you." She paused. "I'm a Latina woman, Mr. Ashford, and I've watched you dismiss people who look like me my entire time here. I stayed quiet because I needed the job. But I'm not sorry this is happening. I'm sorry for your employees who did nothing wrong. But I'm not sorry for you." She turned and left. Victor stood alone in his emptying office, holding a box of meaningless achievements, and finally understood what Marcus Bennett had meant. You built your empire on arrogance and entitlement rather than actual competence and integrity. It had been true. Every deal he'd made had been about who he knew, what club he belonged to, what perception he could create. He'd never actually been as good as he'd thought he was. He'd just been good at looking the part. And when the part was revealed as performance, when people saw who he was underneath the expensive suits and the country club memberships, there was nothing of substance left to hold on to. Victor picked up his box and walked out of his office for the last time. Behind him, Manhattan stretched out in all its glittering indifference. The city that had elevated him would barely notice his fall. Someone else would move into this office. Someone else would make deals. Someone else would believe they were untouchable. Until they weren't. The rebooking process took 6 hours. Every passenger from Flight 403 was accommodated on alternate flights, most within the time frame Kellerman had promised. First-class passengers were treated to lounge access meal vouchers and personal attention from senior Velocity staff who'd been called in to handle the crisis. But what made the biggest impression was the compensation. Each passenger received a personal letter delivered via email within 2 hours of deplaning. Dear valued passenger, on behalf of Bennett Global Logistics and Aviation Holdings, I want to personally apologize for the disruption to your travel plans caused by the crew compliance failure on Velocity Airlines Flight 403. While the incident that led to this flight being grounded was not your responsibility, you were impacted by it. That is unacceptable. Enclosed, please find compensation for your inconvenience. This is not coming from Velocity Airlines. This is coming from my company because I believe that when people are harmed by failures in the aviation industry, those of us with resources have a responsibility to make it right. I hope your continued journey is smooth and that your experience today does not diminish your trust in air travel. Respectfully, Marcus Bennett, CEO, Bennett Global Logistics and Aviation Holdings. The compensation was automatically credited to their accounts within hours. $5,000 for first-class passengers, $2,000 for everyone else. The response on social media was immediate. I just received $2,000 from Marcus Bennett's company for being inconvenienced on Flight 403. This man was profiled and removed, and he's compensating us. Unreal. Got a personal apology letter from the CEO and $5,000. Meanwhile, the flight attendant who caused this is fired. This is how you handle a crisis. The contrast between how Bennett handled this versus how the airline originally handled it is stark. One man with integrity versus an entire corporation that looked the other way. The positive coverage partially offset the tsunami of negative press Velocity was receiving, but only partially. News organizations were now digging deeper into the story. Investigative journalists were requesting complaint records under Freedom of Information laws. Former passengers who'd had similar experiences with Diane Crawford were coming forward with their own stories. CNN ran a segment, Racial Profiling at 30,000 Feet Inside the Culture That Enabled Discrimination. The BBC interviewed aviation industry experts about bias in commercial travel. Business Insider published a deep dive, How One CEO's Experience Exposed Systematic Problems in Airline Complaint Systems. And in all of this coverage, the same passengers kept appearing as sources. Eleanor Davenport gave a powerful interview to the BBC about the responsibility of bystanders to speak up. When you see injustice happening in front of you, you have a choice. You can look away and tell yourself it's not your problem. Or you can stand up and say, not here, not while I'm watching. I'm an elderly white woman. The flight attendant wasn't going to profile me. I wasn't at risk. But that young man was being treated abominably, and I could not stay silent. The interviewer asked her what she would say to people who worry about getting involved. I'd say, your comfort is not more important than someone else's dignity. Speak up, film it, bear witness. Your voice matters more than you think. Ryan Mitchell's full article was published in a major business publication, complete with his video footage and interviews with multiple passengers. The piece was shared hundreds of thousands of times, won an industry award for investigative journalism, and became required reading in several business school ethics courses. But perhaps the most impactful response came from someone unexpected. Sophia Martinez wrote a first-person essay that was published in an online forum for aviation workers. The title, I tried to stop it, but I wasn't brave enough. She detailed watching Diane Crawford profile Marcus Bennett trying to speak up, being threatened into silence, and the guilt she felt afterward. But she didn't stop there. She detailed other incidents she'd witnessed over her 8 months with Velocity, moments when supervisors had made disparaging comments about passengers, times when complaints had been dismissed without investigation, the culture of protecting senior crew members at the expense of passenger dignity. And she ended with a call to action. If you work in this industry and you see bias, you have more power than you think. Document it. Report it. Don't stay silent hoping someone else will speak up, because if we all stay silent, nothing changes. I'm not staying silent anymore. The essay went viral among aviation workers. It sparked conversations in crew lounges across the country. Junior crew members began speaking up about things they'd witnessed. Union representatives started pressing for better complaint review processes, and Sophia received a call from Angela Reyes. Ms. Martinez, this is Angela Reyes, Executive Assistant to Marcus Bennett. He asked me to reach out to you about a potential position with Bennett Global. Sophia, sitting in her small apartment, nearly dropped the phone. A position? We're creating a new division focused on passenger experience and crew culture reform. Mr. Bennett was impressed by your courage in trying to speak up and your honesty in documenting what happened. He thinks you'd be valuable in helping develop better systems. I don't have experience in corporate work. I'm just a flight attendant. You're someone with integrity who understands the reality of what happens in that cabin. That's more valuable than a business degree. Sophia was quiet for a moment. Can I think about it? Of course. But Ms. Martinez, Mr. Bennett wanted me to tell you something. He said that trying to speak up even when you're shut down matters. You planted a seed, and seeds grow. Sophia wiped tears from her eyes. Tell him thank you for seeing that. 2 days later, Sophia Martinez submitted her resignation to Velocity Airlines and accepted a position as passenger experience consultant with Bennett Global Logistics. Her first project, developing an industry-wide standard for complaint review processes that would prevent passengers from being dismissed based on bias. And 3 months later, when that standard was presented at an aviation industry conference, Sophia stood on stage and told her story. About the day she watched injustice happen and tried to stop it. About what it cost her to speak up. And about why she'd do it again. 3 months after Flight 403, the Velocity Airlines Training Center in Miami looked the same from the outside. A modern glass and steel building near the airport housing state-of-the-art flight simulators, cabin mock-ups, and conference rooms where thousands of crew members had been certified over the years. But inside, everything had changed. Sophia Martinez stood at the front of a conference room facing 23 newly certified flight attendants. She was 26 years old, wearing professional business attire instead of a uniform, holding a presentation remote instead of a beverage tray. The title on the screen behind her, Understanding Bias in Passenger Services. My name is Sophia Martinez. I'm the Director of Crew Excellence and Passenger Dignity at Bennett Global Logistics. Before that, I was a flight attendant with Velocity Airlines for 8 months. She clicked to the next slide. It showed a photo of Velocity Flight 403's aircraft door. On this flight, I watched my supervisor profile and remove a passenger based on his appearance. I tried to speak up. I was threatened into silence. The room was completely still, but I documented it anyway. Because silence is complicity. She clicked again. The next slide showed Marcus Bennett's face. That passenger was Marcus Bennett, CEO of the company that owns 43 Boeing 777s in Velocity's fleet. He could have sued this airline into bankruptcy. He could have terminated every contract. He could have destroyed thousands of jobs out of justified anger. Instead, he demanded something harder. He demanded that we become better. One of the trainees raised her hand. What happened to your supervisor? Sophia didn't hesitate. She was fired. Immediately. With cause. As she should have been. Another question. What happened to the other passenger, the one who claimed the seat? His real estate company filed for bankruptcy 6 weeks later. Not because Marcus Bennett destroyed him, but because his investors and partners saw who he really was and decided they didn't want to be associated with him anymore. Sophia moved to the center of the room. Here's what I need you to understand. You are not Diane Crawford. You are not starting your careers carrying 19 years of unchecked bias. You're starting fresh with new policies, new accountability, and new standards. She looked at each of them. You will encounter passengers who don't fit your mental image of first-class business class, or even economy. You will encounter people whose appearances surprise you, whose accents confuse you, whose presence challenges your assumptions. And in those moments, you have a choice. You can do what Diane Crawford did. You can trust your assumptions more than you trust the manifest. Or you can do your job. Check the ticket. Verify the reservation. Treat every passenger with dignity. She paused. Because here's the truth. The passenger in the hoodie might own the plane. The woman in casual clothes might be a doctor flying home after a 36-hour shift. The young man who looks too young for business class might have just closed a deal that will change his entire life. You don't know their stories. You don't know their worth. And you don't need to. You just need to treat them like they belong, because if they have a ticket, they do. The trainees were completely engaged. What if we see actual suspicious behavior, one asked. Then you follow protocol. You report to your supervisor. You document specifically what behavior concerned you. You don't make assumptions based on appearance. The training session continued for another hour, covering real scenarios, actual complaint cases that had been reopened and investigated, and the new verification procedures that were now mandatory across the entire airline. When it ended, several of the new crew members approached Sophia. Thank you for sharing your story. That took courage. Sophia smiled. The courage was trying to speak up when it mattered. Sharing it afterward is easy. Meanwhile, in Velocity's corporate headquarters in Atlanta, Thomas Kellerman sat in a conference room with his executive team, reviewing the results of the 3-month audit Marcus Bennett had demanded. The numbers were damning but not surprising. Of the 847 complaints reviewed, 284 had been improperly closed without adequate investigation. Of those, 267 involved allegations of discrimination or bias. Kellerman had personally called 267 families over the past month. Some of the conversations had been brief. Others had lasted over an hour as passengers shared stories of humiliation, of being questioned, of being made to feel like they didn't belong. Every call had reinforced why this work mattered. The review board had made recommendations for 47 current crew members to receive additional training or disciplinary action. 12 had been terminated for egregious patterns of behavior. 6 regional supervisors had been reassigned to non-passenger-facing positions, and the airline had settled 89 individual claims for a total of $18.7 million. It had been expensive, but not as expensive as losing Bennett Global's contracts would have been. And more importantly, it had been necessary. Kellerman's chief of staff looked up from the financial reports. The stock has stabilized. We're down 11% from pre-incident levels, but trending upward again. What about customer sentiment mixed? We lost some customers who said they'd never fly with us again, but we gained others who appreciated the transparency and the reforms, and crew morale better than expected. The old guard is resistant to the changes, but junior crew members are actually enthusiastic. They feel like they're finally being heard. Kellerman nodded. Schedule another meeting with Marcus Bennett. I want to show him the progress personally. Already done. Next week, Wednesday. Good. Sir Kellerman looked up. Do you think he'll ever fully trust us again? Kellerman was quiet for a moment. I don't know, but I'm going to spend the next decade earning it back anyway. At JFK Terminal 7. Gate 27, a new plaque had been installed near the check-in counter. It read, "This space belongs to every passenger. No exceptions." Below it, a simple commitment. Velocity Airlines is committed to treating all passengers with dignity and respect. If you experience or witness discrimination, bias, or profiling, please report it immediately. Your voice matters. Your complaint will be heard. Anonymous Reporting Velocity Accountability.com. The gate agent on duty, a young woman named Jennifer, who'd been working that chaotic day when Flight 403 was grounded, looked at the plaque every morning when she started her shift. It reminded her why the job mattered. Not just processing tickets, not just moving passengers from gate to aircraft, but protecting dignity, ensuring fairness, making sure that every person who walked through that gate was treated like they belonged. Because they did. In London, Marcus Bennett sat in a conference room with the supply chain consortium he'd flown to meet with the day after the Flight 403 incident. The meeting had gone well. Contracts had been signed, partnerships had been formalized. But as they wrapped up, one of the executives mentioned the incident. "We all saw what happened to you, Marcus, and we saw how you handled it, with strategy, not rage, with demands for reform, not revenge." The executive paused. "That's the kind of character we want in our partners. Not just someone who has power, but someone who uses it responsibly." Marcus nodded his thanks. But privately, he thought about all the people who'd been in his position who didn't have that power. The young professional who got profiled on their way to an important meeting. The elderly woman who got questioned because she didn't dress expensively enough. The family traveling together who got split up because someone made assumptions. Those people hadn't had the leverage to force change. They'd filed complaints that went nowhere. They'd been told their concerns didn't matter, and the system had protected itself instead of protecting them. That was what really needed to change. Not just one airline, not just one policy. The entire culture that allowed bias to hide behind professionalism. Sophia Martinez received a letter 2 weeks after starting her new position at Bennett Global. It was handwritten on expensive stationery addressed to her personally at the corporate office. She opened it carefully. "Dear Ms. Martinez, we have never met, but I watched you try to speak up on Flight 403 when your supervisor was profiling Marcus Bennett. I saw you get shut down. I saw you step back. I saw the fear in your face that speaking up again might cost you your job. And then I learned that you documented it anyway, that you kept recording even when you'd been silenced. I'm a former Velocity flight attendant. I worked for the airline for 12 years. I left 3 years ago after filing 6 separate complaints about my supervisor's behavior toward passengers of color. All 6 were closed as no fault found. I gave up. I left the industry entirely. I convinced myself that the system couldn't be changed and that my voice didn't matter. But you didn't give up, even when you were scared, even when you were threatened. And because you didn't give up, because you documented the truth, the system is changing. I just wanted you to know that what you did mattered to me, to every crew member who tried to speak up and was silenced, to every passenger who was profiled and dismissed. Thank you for your courage. With deep respect, Jennifer Alvarez." Sophia read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. She hadn't thought of herself as courageous. She'd thought of herself as terrified, as not doing enough, as being complicit by not fighting harder. But Jennifer's letter reframed it. Every act of documentation mattered. Every attempt to speak up, even when shut down, planted a seed. Every refusal to stay completely silent contributed to eventual change. Sophia carefully folded the letter and put it in her desk drawer. On the days when her work felt overwhelming, when resistance to change felt insurmountable, she would read it again and remember why it mattered. Eleanor Davenport was invited to speak at a civil rights conference in Washington, D.C. She'd never been a public speaker. She'd never sought attention or acclaim. She was just a grandmother who'd spoken up on a plane because staying silent felt wrong. But the conference organizers had seen the BBC interview. They'd read the articles quoting her. They wanted her perspective on the role of allies in confronting bias. Eleanor stood at the podium, 73 years old and absolutely terrified, looking out at hundreds of people who'd come to hear her speak. She took a breath. "I am not a hero. I am not a civil rights activist. I'm a retired teacher from Surrey who happened to be sitting in seat 2B when a wrong thing was happening. And I want to talk about that word, happened. Because what I witnessed wasn't something that happened to Marcus Bennett. It was something that was done to him, by people who made choices. Diane Crawford chose to assume he didn't belong based on his appearance. Victor Ashford chose to demand his removal based on entitlement. The airline chose to protect crew members who had patterns of bias. Those were all choices. And I had a choice too. I could stay quiet, mind my own business, tell myself it wasn't my problem. But silence is also a choice. And it's a choice that enables all the others. The audience was completely still. So, I want to ask you something. When you see bias happening in front of you, what choice will you make? Will you stay quiet because it's uncomfortable? Because you don't want to cause a scene? Because you tell yourself someone else will speak up? Or will you use your voice, your phone, your presence to say, "Not here, not now, not while I'm watching"? Because here's what I learned that day. My comfort is not more important than someone else's dignity, and neither is yours. The room erupted in applause. After her talk, dozens of people approached her. Many shared their own stories of witnessing bias and regretting staying silent. Others thanked her for modeling the kind of allyship that actually mattered. One young woman, a college student, said something that stuck with Eleanor. "I've read about the civil rights movement. I've studied the famous activists and leaders. But I never thought about all the regular people who just spoke up in everyday moments. You showed me that's where change actually happens. Not in grand gestures, but in small acts of courage by ordinary people." Eleanor hugged her. "You're not ordinary, dear. None of us are. We're all capable of extraordinary things when we choose dignity over comfort." The student walked away holding that thought like a gift. And Eleanor went home to Surrey, back to her ordinary life, carrying the knowledge that one choice to speak up had rippled further than she'd ever imagined. You know what stays with me about this story? It's not the revenge. It's not even the justice. It's the quiet moment before everything changed. Marcus Bennett sat in that seat knowing exactly who he was, knowing he owned the aircraft, knowing he had the power to destroy everyone involved with a single phone call. And he just sat there, calm, patient, waiting. He didn't pull out a business card, didn't say, "Do you know who I am?" Didn't threaten or yell or make a scene. He let them reveal exactly who they were. And then he let the consequences of their choices unfold naturally. That's power, real power. But here's the thing. Most of us will never have that kind of power. We don't own airlines. We can't ground planes. We can't restructure industries with a phone call. So what can we do? We can be Eleanor, sitting in seat 2B watching something wrong happen and refusing to stay quiet, standing up and saying, "I'm a witness. I see this. This is not okay." We can be Ryan, pulling out our phones, hitting record documenting the truth, not for views or likes, but because accountability requires evidence. We can be Sophia, trying to speak up even when we're scared, even when we're shut down. Documenting anyway, refusing to be completely silent even when the system tells us our voice doesn't matter. Because here's what this story taught me. Change doesn't happen because one powerful person decides to fix things. Change happens because ordinary people refuse to be bystanders. Eleanor didn't have billions of dollars. She had a voice and a phone and the courage to use both. Ryan didn't have corporate authority. He had journalism skills and the integrity to tell the truth. Sophia didn't have seniority or protection. She had a conscience and the bravery to document evidence even when it put her job at risk. Those are the heroes of this story. Not Marcus, though he used his power well, but the people without power who chose to act anyway. So I want to ask you something. Next time you're in a hotel lobby, on a plane, in a store, in a bank, and you see someone being dismissed because of how they look, what will you do? Will you look away? Tell yourself it's not your business. Hope someone else speaks up. Or will you pull out your phone? Will you say, "I'm recording this"? Will you position yourself as a witness and make it clear that silence is not an option? You don't need to own the plane. You just need to refuse to be a bystander. That choice right there, that's your power, and it's more powerful than you think. Because Diane Crawford lost her career, not because Marcus Bennett was a CEO. She lost it because ordinary people witnessed, documented, and refused to let her version of the story be the only one that was told. truth matters. Witnesses matter. Your voice matters. Will you use it? If you believe everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of how they look, share this story. And tell me in the comments, have you ever witnessed something like this? Did you speak up? What happened? Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because stories like this matter. People like Eleanor Ryan and Sophia remind us that courage doesn't require power. It just requires the choice to stand up when silence would be easier. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.